leadership. For the design of this summit, we've chosen to adopt portions of Joseph Campbell ideas about the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell, a philosopher, and sort of framed this idea of a hero's journey that's been expressed in countless Hollywood movies, including Star Wars. But that hero's journey contains a couple of key milestones that we're going to use today to frame the choice that members of the engineering community make when they step into the public policy arena. First, engineers must answer what Campbell would term the call to adventure, or for our purposes, what we're calling the call to service. And we'll explore that call to service with the help of our presenters. What it looks like to answer that call and really engage in public policy. Second, we'll explore the experience of what Campbell would call crossing the threshold, as leaders actively engage in a variety of different ways with public service, from serving as a federal fellow to preparing the next generation of leaders in a university setting, to acting within the context of a nonprofit, to shaping public policy while serving in a government agency. Each of those are different paths once you cross that threshold into public policy, and many others, but will represent sort of the work that we want to take advantage of today. We will also supplement those presentations and thought leadership comments by group exercises to deepen our understanding of what it looks like for leaders to undertake this journey, complementing those, the ideas of our speakers with stories offered by all of yourselves, and give you an opportunity as well towards the end of the session to imagine your own journey as you, potentially choose to engage in public policy, or any number of you already engaging in public policy in your own ways. So that really sets the agenda in terms of where we're going. We'll open with some opening remarks by George Sparks, have a panel of federal fellows coming from NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology. We'll have our first of our exercises that will be on either side of our lunch break. We will then have our second set of thought leaders that describe the journey that they've been on, and then a second exercise that begins to wrap things up for our day, and then some summary comments. Now, at the start of each of these, just a reminder that we, certain ground rules are helpful for us when we do these things. I think, over the last 2.5 years of endless Zoom calls, we know most of these. A couple that are useful in particular, though, for our work, the chat function it has been a particularly rich source of information and perspective and sharing of ideas and links, etc. So take advantage of that chat. Also, just the notion that we will be doing this dual screen where we've got the Google Doc workbook as a collective flip chart. It will also be the place where small groups are able to record their information. Mike will operate as the sort of overall note taker with regard to that group that group workbook. We use that workbook really to help us complete the report that comes out of the summit. So it's really a rich source of perspective and information that's generated. So with that, we are ready to go, I think. Mike, have you heard from George?
I'm here.
Oh, all right, George. We were hadn't seen you pop up yet, so yeah. Glad to see you there.
Let me. I thought it was 10:15 my time. I didn't realize it was Central Time. Thanks for calling.
Okay, well, listen. Let me introduce the first of our thought leaders and leaders that will share their perspective about having answered that call to service. George Sparks is president and CEO of the Denver Museum of Science and Nature. Through that museum, he has also helped establish and lead the Institute for Science and Policy. George has a background both as an engineer, but also in business with Hewlett-Packard and other technology companies before assuming his current position with the Denver Museum. We're just really pleased to have George with us to sort of kick the session off and sort of frame this overall perspective about answering the call to service. So George, with that, I will quit screen sharing and allow you to take it up.
So how many folks do we have on the line here? Sorry that I'm late here.
We've got about 34 right now and a few more joining us late, George.
Okay, there you are. Okay, I see you now.
Okay.
Good. So anyway, welcome everybody. This is something I really care about. So I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember this, but my dad was a World War II vet. So when I was a kid, when we were learning typing, he would type out the phrase, "Now's the time for all good men to come to the aid of their country," period. And it turns out that they taught people to type using that because it was 70 characters long. And you could type out that sentence, then you'd hit return and type it out again. So that's how people learn to type. So I would paraphrase that now's the time for all good engineers to come to the aid of their country, because there are a lot of things going on right now that where engineers really are a bigger part of the deal, and we should become more engaged. Now, since this is about policy and should engineers get engaged in policy, let me give you a little bit of a history about the eras that we lived in. So we had the New Deal, which was from 1932 when Roosevelt was elected to about 1980 when Reagan was elected. The New Deal was all about big, large government projects, things like Social Security. They built a Hoover Dam. Obviously, World War II was a big deal. We built the interstates in 10 years. Engineers were really necessary and a huge part of that whole growth of America between 1932 and about probably 1970 or so. And we also in the 70s, though, we had the Vietnam War. We had a lot of kickback around, does the government know what they're doing? A lot of big mandates like the EPA, the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, the Department of Energy was formed. So the bureaucrats and the activists began to slowly take over government at that point and began pushing a lot of unfunded mandates. And a lot of those things didn't have input from engineers. When I say engineer, I mean anybody that has to get something done on time, on budget, and safe, and will work for forever. And not everybody has the skill to do that. Engineers, I think, are uniquely qualified to do that. So, after Vietnam and Watergate, then Reagan was elected with the shining city on the hill, and we had entered the era of what I call neoliberalism. And this was from about 1980 for the next 40 years, till about 2020. And there were a few really key parts of this. One was unfettered markets, more free markets, less regulation, globalism, supply chains began to move around the world. We spread out all over the world, looking for the most efficient and lowest priced products all over the world. And those choices were really made mostly by companies. So I worked at Hewlett Packard at the time, and I can remember moving one of our factories to China. And we went through a really rigorous process to determine, was that a good deal or not? So the engineers and the economists and the money people were all actively engaged in that because everybody knew what the objective was. And we understood that was where the corporation was headed. Now, I call that another era when engineers ruled. Now, the downside of that, as we've seen here over the last decade or so, is that inequality has risen between countries, between people in the country. A lot of very, very wealthy people and some of the people at the bottom end of the socioeconomic scale don't feel like that they've been able to take advantage of that. COVID came along, which I think reset a lot of things. Supply chains, those supply chains were originally meant to be efficient, not resilient. And as we've seen during COVID, resilience is a huge part of being able to survive some of these big changes that take place in the world. So starting in 2020, and really it was under probably slightly before that under President Trump, we entered the era that I don't know what the name is going to be, but it's all about industrial policy. The government is going to make policy now in broad strokes and use incentives to try to create change within society based around those. We also have communal problems like climate change, where the free markets simply aren't equipped to deal with it completely. We can help, but I think we can't do the full thing. Probably the biggest thing that we did in industrial policy under President Trump was the Operation Warp Speed, when we went out and created that COVID vaccine. Government put money behind it, and the companies responded to that. The other big ones, obviously, the Infrastructure Act, the CHIPS Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act, the Climate Change Act. I talked to Senator Hickenlooper a while back, and he said that there was no coherent strategy behind the Inflation Reduction Act. It was a stack of stuff that went up or down day by day, depending upon which senator was in and which senator was out. So it really is a package. It's a ton of money, and there are going to be a lot of companies competing for this money, and it's not clear how it's going to work out. So right now, I believe that the legislators here in Colorado and other places around, they're well-meaning, but they're not familiar with all the things we're having to deal with now. Everything from AI to genomics to energy transitions, et cetera. They set goals, mostly the bureaucrats and the activists will set goals that aren't based in reality. For example, in Denver, the head of the climate action group in Denver came to me and said, you're going to have to reduce your climate emissions of this 700,000 square foot building by 30% by 2030, or you're going to be fined $15 million a year. Now, my whole budget is only $50 million a year, so 15 million is going to put us out of business. So I brought him in and talked to him, and it turns out that people that made those goals, there were no architects, there were no engineers, there were no economists. They were all just basically community activists setting up these goals, which we may or may not be able to achieve. But I think it's if we had a few engineers on it, it probably would have been much, much better. An article came out yesterday. We've all heard about how wind and solar costs 2 cents a kilowatt hour. Well, it turns out that in order to take advantage of wind and solar, you have to put them in places where people aren't. And our current transmission grid in the United States is 180,000 miles long. It took us 150 years to do that. In order to adequately fund the electrical grid with wind and solar, that's going to have to become 800,000 miles of transmission lines. And that will cost the United States about $1 trillion to do that, if we could get permits to do it. So we got some of these really, really big problems out there right now that I think engineers need to get engaged on these. More and more legislators are passing rules and laws and then turn it over to bodies like the PUC or rulemaking bodies, commissions, et cetera, to come up with the details behind it and fill in the blanks, so to speak. And that's where we as engineers can become more engaged and really try to help bring some reality to some of these things. Seattle just passed a law that says they're going to electrify their complete built environment by 2050. We did some back of the envelope calculations in Colorado just to take the 2 million homes that we have and convert them to heat pumps would cost $60 billion to do it by 2050. That's equivalent of 1/3 of the public school education budget of the state of Colorado for the next 30 years. And that's probably not going to happen. So that's where I think we as engineers, if we get engaged in some of these policy issues and try to bring a little reality to it, we can really have an impact on this. So you're going to probably have to become a little more engaged politically. Certainly from a policy point of view, if we're going to have this impact, we just can't sit back and wait and see who gets the money and then go to work for them and get engaged. It's probably too late if we do it by then. So with that, Kyle, does anybody have any questions? I don't see a chat here or anything.
Well, George, I might ask, you might make a few remarks about, your decision there at the museum a number of years ago, 2018, I believe it was, yep, to really, step more firmly into the realm of public policy with the establishment of the Institute for Science and Policy there. And you might speak just briefly to, what your goals and objectives are for that initiative and some of the particular things that you're trying to do there.
Yep. So historically, the museum has been about nature and science. And I call it, we were just a pretty face. We were someplace where you brought your kids, you'd learn about science, you'd have a good time, but we weren't relevant on some of the policy issues of the day. When President Trump was elected, there was a lot of talk about the war on science. And I would tell people you can't have a war on science any more than you can have a war on math. Math is going to win. You're not going to defeat science. You're not going to defeat math. Those are fixed things. Now, science changes over time, but if you use it for what it's good at, it can be the foundation for good policy. Not the only thing. You need to take into account finances and equity and a lot of other factors, but at least use science for something that it's good at. So we started the Institute for Science and Policy so that science could have a respected seat at the table when legislators or policymakers got together. It turns out we started it, we had several what we call convenings, and we would bring people together from disparate points of view. Our first convening was around decarbonizing Colorado. So we brought youth, we brought legislators, engineers, nonprofits, et cetera, together, spent about 6 months together talking about how we decarbonize Colorado. And the key thing that happens during these convenings is people get to see each other as real human beings and not the other. In so many of our interactions with people different from us, we see everybody else as the enemy. I had a thing called the Lunch Bunch, where we brought 6 oil and gas CEOs and 6 environmental CEOs together and had lunch once a month for a year. And they now are able to work together much better than they were able to in the past. When COVID hit, the Institute immediately partnered with the School of Public Health and had a series of 32 webinars around COVID, brought together experts from around the country. We had sessions around equity. We had sessions around the science. We had sessions around how do people make decisions, et cetera. And it was very, very powerful and continues to this day be something that we continue to talk about. And the School of Public Health is now a permanent partner of ours. Probably the thing that I'm most proud of, though, is that there's this little town up in northwest Colorado called Craig, Colorado. And they had 2 coal mines and a coal-fired power plant that is scheduled to be shut down in about a year. So we went up and did an 8-part podcast series around Craig, Colorado, talking about the human implications of this decision, which was a good science decision, but what did it really mean to the people of Craig, Colorado? And the net for me was that the miners and the people in the town said, we were so proud of delivering electricity to civilization, and now we're demonized for running coal. And that's just not right, that we make these decisions around policy without thinking about what's the alternative and what's the impact upon the human beings there. That podcast series won a gold medal from the National Academy of Sciences as the best educational podcast of the year. We recently finished one around water in the San Luis Valley, again, bringing water engineers together with farmers, water managers, political leaders, and getting people to talk to each other and to try to figure out solutions to things based in reality, based in science, based in engineering, based in economics, and not just based in emotion. I only half jokingly say that we should have named the Institute for Science and Policy the Institute for Science and Human Nature, because that's all we talk about is human nature. How do people make decisions? How do we help people change their minds about things, which is pretty hard to do. Turns out they don't change their minds because of data. They change their minds because of stories and because of relationships. And that's what we try to do with the Institute for Science and Policy. One of the former board members that I have here, his name is Jim Crocker. He was a vice president at Lockheed Martin. And he started this group that's basically a bunch of folks like on this thing here. And you get together for lunch once a month and you have a challenge. You have 2 minutes to explain why hybrid electric vehicles are better than pure electric vehicles or vice versa. And so you get to study up on these things and try to convince the other side on some of these big public policy issues. Turns out Jim is an engineer's engineer. You may remember when the Hubble Space Telescope was launched and it was had astigmatism. Jim worked for Lockheed Martin then. He went home that night and with straws and marshmallows figured out how to fix the Hubble Space Telescope, brought it in the next day, and his design from his straws and marshmallows that he did at home is the basis of the fix to the Hubble Space Telescope. So he's a fascinating guy. He's somebody you would all love to sit down and have a beer with and talk about some of these things. So the Institute, I think, is one of the things I'm most proud of in my career, because it got the museum out of being just a pretty face, and now we're really relevant to the legislature in Colorado, to the public policy makers, to scientists. We have about 20 partnerships with people like NREL and the universities and Payne Institute for Science all around the state, and we get engaged on these conversations. Right now, we've put together a cabal, I call them, on how do we make Colorado the clean tech capital of the world, the Silicon Valley of clean tech. So we're working with the businesses, Chamber of Commerce, the universities, the entrepreneur system, to try to create the right environment for companies to be successful in Colorado around clean tech, because it's going to happen. And if we do it well, we can be the place that makes that happen.
That's a great story, George. I mean, I'm so appreciative of the work that you're doing there. I want to highlight a couple things, and then we're going to move into our panel. I think George has brought into clarity for us this morning. First, just the work on the Institute for Science and Policy. You know, George comes, with this background as an engineer, but through his life's journey ends up at this place where he has the power to convene. He has the power to convene, and so he chooses to, with the Institute of Science and Policy, convene groups of people to take on these big issues that are facing society and to explore them, generate ideas, to, but also, that final point that George, you were just making in terms of making change to build relationships and trust. And so today we're going to be exploring different ways that engineers or members of the engineering community can engage in public policy. And I just want to make that emphasis here. The power to convene is there, and to find those opportunities where you can convene smart, passionate, caring people to work on these important issues, and that the engineers can play a role there beyond the typical technical problem solving. With that, I'll just again emphasize, really appreciate, George, you're framing this as a new era with those big programs and great challenges that society has ahead. How will this era unfold, what you're calling industrial policy, but there's so many different elements of it. Well, I actually, really pleased that we've got the panel that Mike Molnar has put together for us this morning, that are a set of federal fellows working in the National Institute of Science and Technology. Mike is the director of the NIST Office of Advanced Manufacturing. He comes at that position from a background both as an engineer, but also in particular working for Cummins, the engine manufacturer and technology company. Made the leap over to public service, answered the call to service himself, I think about 20 years ago, through his own fellowship, and then helping form through NIST and some other organizations this advanced manufacturing program that the United States is putting in place, linked into a number of the big initiatives that George was just highlighting. So I've had, Mike has agreed to put together a panel of fellows that are working within NIST, that each of them have answered that call out of their own lives with universities or with biotech companies or Ford Motor Company or other places to join Mike and the work that NIST is doing in the realm of public policy. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike. He'll introduce the panel members and moderate a conversation with these four fellows. So Mike.
Well, terrific. Kyle, thank you so much. Can you hear and see me?
Yes.
Oh, very good. Good morning. Thank you, Kyle. I'm really delighted to participate in this important Engineering Change Lab conference on engineering and public policy. Kyle reached out to me because he saw a speech I gave I don't know, 6-7 years ago on engineering and public policy, and I had forgotten I did that, and I had forgotten it was there. But I thought that was an intriguing thing. And yes, I'm I'm a guy from industry. Most of my career, 25 years, was with Cummins, leading technology development. And this is where I exercise the muscles to work with national labs, universities, and federal agencies. And it was this call to service after 9/11 of how can a mid-career technologist help the government, and that's when I found the Federal Fellows Program, and that's where I was recruited, and that was actually 20 years ago. I went back into industry, but then a few years ago, about 10 or 11 years ago, they called me to help establish an interagency team, and so that's what we are here this morning. Is that Kyle mentioned NIST. I hope many of you know that the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, is Industry's national lab. It's the first national lab for the United States, established in 1901. But I'm not going to be talking about the intramural side, the standards, the metrology, the laboratory programs. It's really about the extramural side and how NIST is the home of an interagency team called the Advanced Manufacturing National Program Office. And we have, this is the interagency team of all of the agencies that have major programs and activities in advanced manufacturing. The core staff is hosted at NIST, and I'm delighted that we have four of some of the smartest people I've ever encountered. I'm privileged that they are serving with us as current or immediate past federal fellows. But before I get to that, I think it would be helpful to really set the stage. And I want to make three key points before we dive into, introduce the fellows and dive into this. So just so we don't miss the details from the big picture, I appreciated the opening, and I want to dovetail into this, that we're making the point. Number one, nearly every public policy issue that we face today involves technology. It is really essential to have technical expertise in the development of policy, and that policy could be legislation from Congress or administration policy from the executive branch. So point number one is, and again, I'll be the first to say I'm an engineer, so I'm a little biased by science and technology, but I think every important public policy, nearly every important public policy issue that we have involves technology. Second, we all know that technology can move very quickly. Matching the technical expertise to current public policy issues moves exponentially faster than the ability to add congressional staff or to hire federal employees. This is why federal fellows programs serve such an important role in connecting scientists, engineers, and other technical specialists to the legislative and executive branches. As Kyle indicated, I was recruited mid-career some 20 years ago as a federal fellow to serve as the first advanced manufacturing policy leader in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. I got trained through this AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS Federal Fellows Program, and these have been going on for many decades. Similarly, each of the four panelists that I will introduce in just a moment joined using a Federal Fellows Program, AAAS or ASME or other mechanisms to serve a 1 or 2 year appointment, matching their technical expertise and their personal and professional interests to current federal initiatives. Third and last is, I want to thank Don for pointing this out, that when we talk about public policy, you might think of wonkish things and debate and legislative committee meetings leading up to a bill, and that certainly involves policy. But the development of sound engineering public policy for some new piece of legislation, that's really important. But this is only the start. The implementation of these laws, the programs, the initiatives, whether at the federal level or state or regional or local level, is where it really impacts and helps people. So some people may not consider that policy, but I like to consider this holistically or comprehensively. So the third and last point to set the stage here is I'm talking about big P policy, which involves implementation as well as the original thought process about some initiative, and that the federal government has broad need of technical expertise in practically every federal agency. So now we jump in. I'm really excited that four of these federal fellows are with us this morning. Each of them are with this Interagency Advanced Manufacturing National Program Office. Everyone from industry, engineers, we love our acronyms. Guess what? The federal government, we really love our acronyms. So that's the AMNPO, the Advanced Manufacturing National Program Office. And I already introduced the other one, the AAAS, or American Association for the Advancement of Science. So our first panelist is Erin Lavick. She is a AAAS Policy Fellow. Erin is working on coordinating education and workforce initiatives across the Manufacturing USA Institutes. Manufacturing USA is a public-private partnership that each of these are applied research institutes that is really industry-led, a really key partnership between the federal government supporting academia and industry. Erin received all of her degrees, including her doctorate from MIT, and she founded a company, Ortuvo LLC, to develop 3D tissue models. Erin is on leave from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, where she is the Associate Dean for Research and Faculty Development and a Professor of Biomedical Engineering. We have Clifton Ray. Clifton is a second-year Advanced Manufacturing Policy Fellow. Clifton works with federal agency staff to develop research, development, and educational strategies to improve the impact of those institutes in the Manufacturing USA network on the manufacturing ecosystem and on domestic supply chains. I really like how we set up that if there's any silver lining to the COVID global pandemic, it was a reminder that so many of our supply chains were set up for efficiency, not resiliency. And here's where we are pivoting as folks understand the value of having a robust and resilient domestic supply chain for all of the goods that are needed in our society. So Clifton works on manufacturing ecosystem and on these domestic supply chains. Prior to joining the AMNPO, Clifton worked as a senior scientist for ZenBio. In this role, he led contract services and product development to accelerate research and therapies for human diseases. Clifton received a PhD in biomedical engineering from the University of Virginia and a bachelor's from Duke University in biomedical engineering. We have Craig J. Scott. He is an Advanced Manufacturing Policy Fellow serving as our Assistant Director for Research Partnerships. He also serves as Professor and Chairperson of the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Morgan State University. Craig received his PhD in Electrical Engineering from Howard University, his Master's in Electrical Engineering from Cornell University, and his Bachelor's in Electrical Engineering from Howard University. And finally, we have Don Ufford. He is serving as our Assistant Director for Supply Chain and Ecosystem Development, where he works with federal staff to develop partnerships to improve the impact of the Manufacturing USA Institutes on the manufacturing ecosystem and on domestic supply chains. Don started with our office as a AAAS Fellow from 2020 to 2022. Prior to joining the AMNPO, Don had over 30 years of experience creating and delivering cars and trucks as a leader at the Ford Motor Company. Don received a master's in engineering from Purdue University, an MBA from the University of Michigan, and a bachelor's in engineering from South Dakota State University. So welcome to all four of our very impressive federal fellows. And I'm going to just jump right into it. We'll start with Erin. I invite everyone to jump in. But Erin, why do you think there is a need for federal fellows to be involved with engineering public policy in the first place?
I think you need to have fellows involved in all aspects, not just in the engineering ones, because of course, engineering is about interacting with the world around us. I think, selfishly as an engineer, I've learned an incredible amount in getting to engage in the public policy space that makes me a better engineer. And the other side of that is I'm able to bring my technical expertise and my ability to tackle seemingly intractable problems and break them down into more manageable ones. And that skill set is hugely useful in taking on the challenges we face.
Other
And
panelists?
oh, go ahead. Yeah, I'll just jump off of what Aaron had said and just say that the direct industry experience that I've had as a scientist or even as an engineer definitely has helped to essentially develop a lot of the strategies, as Mike said, around the manufacturing ecosystems and supply chains, and being in a small company and having those type of perspectives around problem solving can directly be involved in the policy space that we live in. And just staying on one point of the analytical skills that we develop as engineers, those are very useful as we look at metrics to inform program success and really guide the funding that we so desperately need at times in order to carry out the programs that we are authorized by Congress. So those metrics and analytical skills are always used in their day-to-day activity.
Greg or Don?
I think adding just a little bit to that, sometimes I think the groups involved with government get involved because they're very passionate about public policy and very passionate about government. And they bring a skill set to government that is needed and is super helpful, but sometimes they lack that connection back to areas that are rapidly changing. And one of those areas is technology. And engineers have that natural connection to technology. They have that natural interest in technology. And so engineering involvement in the public policy area can bring that technology knowledge, that interest, that vision for the future on where it might go into the discussions with the public policy experts and the economists that are there, and help give them another perspective as people then work together in teams to try and fashion and understand how might that policy be developed and how might it be implemented. And I think especially people that have been out in industry and have been responsible for leading teams in industry and making things, that implementation perspective is something that's really valuable to be able to bring to the table in a lot of the public policy discussions. Thank you.
Yeah, I also like to follow on what Don had said, and I think when I first became an engineer, I looked at engineering as an application of science and technology to be able to solve problems. But the whole thing, the clause about for the benefit of people is really important. And sometimes we lose that perspective. And so when we get into public policy and also implementation, it's really important to be able to keep people in mind as we think about all the great things that we innovate, invent with, and everything else. So I think that the whole thing about benefiting society, people want to make an impact, and that was my way of looking at a way to get into doing that.
Thank you. I'm going to really, folks may have noticed here and when I say the diversity word, I mean spectrum diversity in all of its elements. And an important thing to recognize in the Federal Fellows Program is that AAAS, they're really focused on scientists. And if you look at that distribution, it is really bimodal. That most of the people, and I'm guessing, I'm not up on the stats, but we might be talking about, say, 150 or so that are AAAS fellows right now. Most of those are up on in the legislative branch, in the House or the Senate, on committees or such. But the majority of those are freshly minted postdocs. But then you'll also see end of career folks The other programs that we mentioned, ASME, and we have other mechanisms to bring folks on as fellows, even directly via the IPA or Intergovernmental Personnel Act. But my point is that we have a really big range. I came on as a mid-career, and I was in a pretty small majority. I'm sorry, a minority, where there were very young people, and there were one of my dear colleagues at the time. He was the retiring dean of engineering from UNLV. So there are opportunities through the entire spectrum, no matter where you are in your career. So that leads us into, I'm going to reverse it here with Don started after he retired from enormously successful industry career, 30 years at Ford Motor Company. Don, what was your reason for wanting to be a federal fellow?
Yeah, after working at Ford, I had a great opportunity at Ford to experience manufacturing and product development around the world. And so as I looked at the growth in other areas outside the United States, and what I thought was a lot of opportunity that we had here in the US that we weren't harnessing, I thought that looking for an opportunity to work in government might be able to better connect, I think, the ecosystems here in the US with, you know, the great academic institutions we have and some really strong companies, whether they're entrepreneurial companies and or Fortune 500 companies, and connect them together in order to promote our global manufacturing, you know, excellence and competitiveness, you know, to make sure that we have that capability here in the US to help with supply chains. And I'd say that, you know, when COVID hit, it really reinforced my thought that we need to make sure that we're paying attention to our manufacturing here domestically for the resiliency aspects that that COVID brought about. But then, you know, I also loved my career in manufacturing at Ford and making products that people could use and enjoy, and people could, I think, frankly, have a better life.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to make sure that, you know, we still have that capability for younger people that are coming into the workforce that want to do that. And I think manufacturing is just a fantastic career that, you know, I didn't want to see that go away. So the Manufacturing USA program is a great way to then connect that passion for manufacturing and products with government, and looking for ways that that government policy can help make that you know, a good environment for manufacturers.
Thank you, Don. Cliff, you chose to be a federal fellow at the beginning of your career, and I know it's going to be a long and productive career. Why did you leave Zen Bio so soon and jump into federal fellows?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it was one that I was debating with myself for multiple years in grad school, actually, where there was a colleague of mine saying, you know, you'll be great as someone working in policy. And in my mind, I'm thinking policy is just what you see on TV and Congress. They're just, you know, sometimes yelling at each other, just saying, I don't want to deal with politics. So as I was doing more and more work in my career, I started really becoming interested in just the social issues that were going on, and particularly the Flint, Michigan crisis. And Don, you clearly know this well. And I just thought to myself, how is it that this can happen given the talent in this country and just the engineering capabilities that we have? And so as that started to evolve and you start seeing more and more what the issues were, a large part of the failures was just around policy and essentially bad governance. So I wanted to say, you know, see rather opportunities that existed to get into this space to learn how do you prevent things from happening like that. As far as an engineer, how can I come in and help solve issues such as that? And essentially started applying to the AAAS program and was able to get in through the application process. Took a few months to learn more about what policy looked like, but I really became fascinated just learning about how I was capable as a early career engineer to help with this process. And now that I see how the framework or what the framework looks like, I can see where my talents fit into this.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because 20 years ago, when I first informed my boss, I want to leave. I want to take a leave. And actually, if they didn't approve a leave, I was just going to leave the company. And my boss at the time said, Mike, I thought you were a pretty bright engineer. Why would you want to get a lobotomy and work in as a bureaucrat in policy? And this real mismatch in thinking that policy doesn't involve technology. I think that was the epiphany for me. Fortunately, his boss had a much broader picture of that, but we all have different reasons that we may want to serve. Craig or Aaron, did you want to jump in on that before we move on?
Yeah, I could just say that it's an interesting story because I thought that that I work at a university, and it's a historically black college and university, a black college, and there I always looked at whatever opportunity I could get to be able to help have more opportunities for our students. I was always trying to do. So there's a thing called plus ups, and they just became popular again. And so my dean, who was my mentor, took me to Capitol Hill on several occasions. And when he took me to these things, I always thought policymaking was only through lobbyists, and but I found out that no, there can be public policy, and through what we're doing now, which seems to be a more assuring and more self-directed method to do that. So I saw an opportunity to get involved with policymaking through this mechanism, and I jumped for it. So that's my story.
Good. Let me send the next question to Aaron. Aaron, what preparation, experience, or training was most helpful to you in the role that you now have?
Gosh, that's a great question. So one of the biggest things that I've done is in my role as associate dean, a lot of facilitation, a lot of convenings and bringing people together to find common ground. And I would say that was probably the most useful thing I could do. Besides being in my previous life, I was a stage manager for theatrical productions, and dealing with the insanity of the run of show has also had a lot of helpful qualities in trying to figure out. Very often we'll be asked to do something very quickly and on the fly and with relatively limited knowledge. And I have to say, I love it. It's really phenomenal. It's a great gift, and getting to get up to speed and coordinating with people is an extraordinary opportunity.
Anyone else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I'll add something to that where when you're doing this convening, it's very useful for your communication skills to be very top notch. And when it comes to writing, and this is where as an engineer or a scientist, you really can excel, is understanding that complex topic around technology, for instance, and really boiling it down to a simple language is crucial for policy to be developed and implemented. And if you can disseminate that to multiple groups and audiences, that is a very major win. And that's something that I had to do as someone in industry, where it was working with the business teams, it was working with production, it was working with other PhD scientists, even where you would have to have your messaging tailored so that these groups could be involved in the process and the work could be fulfilled.
Yeah, I'd also say, engineering and knowledge and practice of systems engineering, and considering those interactions is perfect background for policy, and it really helps you think, more broadly than just the narrow area that you're having a discussion. What are those other aspects that need to be considered? And you may put together your own FMEA and evaluate it that way, or whatever engineering tool you want to use, but trying to make sure that you think very critically and broadly about the connections and interrelationships. Engineering is perfect to help set you up for this.
I dare say no lobbyists. So the value of having this is to ensure that the voice of science and technology is part of that development. And I dare say no lobbyists would actually use FMEA, failure modes and effects analysis, in thinking about in inputs. So let me open up to the whole panel on this particular question. Can you share, you will not hear, I dare say, from any of these people that I'm just a fellow, what can I do for the greater good? So can you share an example of something that you did or contributed that had an effect on a policy development or an implementation, a program, or an initiative? Craig, can you start us?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. When I first came to NIST, one of my managers sat me down and said, I'd like for you to make this, write out a pre-decisional paper on the CHIPS legislation, which you would do for workforce development. And so I sat down and just wrote my heart out, just wrote all the ideas I had on a piece of paper. And it was really, really interesting because it made me go back over lots of things I learned, what I like to do. And lo and behold, when I look at how CHIPS is unfolding, a lot of the recommendations that I put down on that piece of paper are actually being implemented as we speak now. So I really feel good about being able to share ideas and have those ideas come to fruition. And the whole thing was to be able to get more diversity, equity, and inclusion in the decision-making process for CHIPS. And I think that is actually happening.
Very well said. I think for engineering public policy, it is a meritocracy of good ideas. So that's really the value here. Anyone else want to comment on this one?
Yeah, I think one of the projects I had an opportunity to get involved with was the National Strategy for Advanced Manufacturing. And it's put out under the White House, and it's opportunity for the U.S. government to think broadly and engage stakeholders in what are the critical areas for advanced manufacturing that we need to look at into the future. And it's a great opportunity to engage stakeholders, have a discussion about what's important, and then understand and think about how can we organize, the federal government efforts into the future, and what might a strategy or a framework look like in order to make sure that we're working on the right topics, and we have people engaged from the right agencies that are then going out and engaging the private sector partners. And how do we show all the partners that are involved how that works together in order to help move U.S. manufacturing forward. So I was really excited about doing that. Really happy that's out there now, and hear it referenced when I hear people talking about that, and using it as they consider what the next steps are that they're going to do. That's really something that I'm pretty proud of and excited about.
Thank you so much. Aaron, when you joined, was everything exactly how you expected, or what did you learn that was most surprising or unexpected about joining? And now you have a badge that says you're a Fed working in this area. What was most surprising or unexpected?
I think the thing that was most surprising was how well people work across agencies and how willing people are to really listen to each other and to really collaborate. I come from academia, and academia is a wonderful place, but it is at times challenging to get people to collaborate across institutions, even sometimes across departments. And I was really struck by how open people are to new ideas, and and how quickly people responded. One of the things I'm very passionate about in the DEIA space is neurodiversity, and how we can make manufacturing more accessible to neurodiverse populations. And what was striking to me was how many people immediately said, that sounds really important. Tell me more. How do we think about that? What role does technology have? It's exciting to have people that are open-minded and willing to learn and try to work together. I think that surprised me. You know, my impression of government was not that, and yet that's been my experience.
A follow-up, you had a new FLA for some people. What can you explain what DEIA is and why it's being referenced in many of these new initiatives, including the CHIPS initiative for semiconductor manufacturing?
So it's diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And the accessibility piece is about 18 months old. Diversity, equity, inclusion, a lot of people have heard about that. But it's exciting that accessibility is understood to be part of it. I think one of the biggest things to say about this is that sometimes people will say, well, you know, what kind of diversity do you want? And the answer is we want to reflect America when we do this work. We really want to reflect our whole population.
So well put. Cliff, did you have any surprises or unexpected lessons when you joined, or was it exactly the way you expected?
It wasn't exactly the way I expected. And it's good that Aaron brought up the people process, or at least the people involved in this federal government framework. And I would say it's been phenomenal to work with the group at NIST, and the people at NIST are extremely talented, extremely intelligent, and it's just been a joy to work with them. And you get to see how many systems of people or stakeholders that exist to actually develop and implement policy. The people that we work with are truly devoted to public service. And I just want to mention that because a lot of times I can see from the outside in, they don't know how many people are really involved in the process and the day-to-day activities that people are willing to go beyond in order to really implement policy. And then another thing I want to mention is the interesting aspect about the federal government is just the kind of framework that is dealt with in Congress, where in the outside, you can really have this flexibility on initiating new companies or new initiatives, but really we're set in this kind of framework where Congress sets us up for authorizations and appropriations, where we really have a fine focus on what we can achieve, and really our statutory purposes really drive what we are able to do as federal workers. So just want to put that out there, as well as kind of this different playground, for lack of a better word here, that we deal with when you're in the federal government.
Dr. Scott, you're a full professor. You are chair of the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Morgan State University. Oh my goodness, you're a big wheel in academia. What was your motivation to set that aside and pursue a federal fellowship?
Well, I'd say this, and there was a comment before about a person being dean. I think you made the comment about a person being dean, and you kind of wonder, well, what's life like after being a dean? You've done a lot of things, and maybe you might not want to be a provost or a president or something like that. But so I looked at it and I said, okay, how do I make an impact? How do I still do things for people? And this just seemed like a natural. Plus, I got a call from a very important person, very person that I admire a lot. And they said, how would you consider doing this? And to me, it was an opportunity, because I always thought in coming up that there were two ways of being of doing engineering. Either you went the technical or you went the administrative route. And so here I find another way, which is sort of like administrative, but it uses technical too. So it's like a hybrid between the two. So I said, hey, this sounds like something I definitely would like to try. And I have no regrets about doing it. No regrets at all. As a matter of fact, I enjoy it. And I encourage my students and my fellow faculty to also do something in policymaking with science and engineering.
Same question. Don, you retired from Ford as a senior executive. You retired. Oh, good heavens. You were the director of global vehicle engineering at Ford, responsible for employees and vehicles located in all global markets. You're retired. You could sit on a beach somewhere. You could join boards and serve in that. Why would you want to nope, join the federal government and be a federal fellow?
Well, actually, given the technology we have, you can't tell I may be near the beach right now.
So true.
No, yeah, I was I'm really interested and intrigued by the capability that we have in the U.S. government, and referencing a little bit of the previous question, the people that you get to work with here are just fascinating, and there's people with super deep backgrounds, really smart and capable, and they bring up intriguing questions and things that that if we could get together and figure out, it could really help move the U.S. forward and technology forward. And so I love working with those individuals and the different agencies. And it did surprise me how much capability there is in the U.S. government. And furthermore, I'm going to say it surprises me how we don't have a real good process to engage people from industry into U.S. government and then maybe back into industry. So while some of us like Mike and Cliff have been in industry before and are able to bring that to the U.S. government, there aren't a lot of people that have been out in industry before and have come into government service. So I think that is an area where, as I try and encourage, other friends of mine to consider government service, I will say it isn't the natural thing for them to think about. So what this group does here, talking about public policy, talking about engaging engineers, I think is super helpful and really important. And my experience has just been real rewarding, seeing the capabilities that we have here in the government, and in particular, I'm going to say at NIST, out at the labs. Mike didn't talk much about it, but our laboratory facilities out at NIST, where we do all sorts of work for industry. My goodness, it's groundbreaking. It's super exciting, and I got to say, we ought to get more people engaged, at least with the labs from industry, to see the great stuff that's going on out there.
Yeah, so very well said. One of the things I'm most proud of being a lab director at NIST is that the majority of people, the 3,500 NIST scientists and engineers, if you were to visit our laboratories on either of the campuses and walk up to somebody randomly, you have better than a 50-50 chance. We have 3,700 additional NIST associates. These are guest researchers. These are folks from industry and academia doing projects or doing postdoc work or doing initiatives with NIST. So it really is that connection. And I didn't really talk about the intramural programs, but traceable to NIST is the gold standard when you're talking about metrology and standards. Let me ask both Aaron and Cliff, both of you are really world recognized experts in biomedical technologies. So is that a coincidence that folks may not know that we have executive orders and major federal initiatives in bio? So we're talking about biomedical and biomanufacturing. A lot of things are going on. So what do you hope to accomplish during your time as fellow? Let's start with Aaron.
Well, it's funny. I mean, people warned me before I did this, the government is not fast. Nothing you will do will happen quickly. And they're not wrong. Do I expect to have shifted everything in the next, few months? No, but it's amazing to me at the same time how many things do get impacted and changed by bringing the right knowledge and working with the right people. I am floored, actually. You know, we had this bioeconomy executive order, and that has stimulated these fantastic conversations. And one of the really neat things was we've been brought into that, you know, through our institutes, but also participating in the groups, really trying to work out, what does a bio workforce look like? What do we need for that? What do we need on the technology side? What kind of capacity do we have? God forbid we have another pandemic, but would we be able to make the next vaccine for that? And so getting to be part of that and getting to help ground some of the conversations in, here's what we're doing now, here's what we could be doing, and here's how we could prepare, both from the pure workforce and technology point of view, and how we can integrate those things. How do we train people up quickly to address those issues? All of that comes together. So yes, I'm going to pass it to Cliff to really jump in.
Yeah, and related to specifically the bio sphere that we sit in, I was hoping to really help develop and implement strategy to improve programs and the funding of innovation in the different sciences that biomedical engineering sits in. And Aaron mentioned the recent executive order on the bioeconomy. That has really been able to increase activity around multiple agencies to convene experts and discuss what is needed for our country to remain a leader in biopharma and biotechnology. And Mike might have mentioned this, but our office is responsible for sponsoring NIMBLE, the National Institute for Innovation in Biopharmaceutical or Manufacturing and Biopharmaceuticals. And with that, that exists in a whole ecosystem that convenes together different industry experts as well as academia and nonprofits together to really catalyze the innovation in biopharma. And one of the things I hope to accomplish was honestly being a part of that ecosystem. And there is a meeting coming up next week, network meeting, and I'll be there to help network and facilitate conversation. And that is so valuable as far as being a fellow in this space here, where just being able to have my input provided and listening will really help to inform policy efforts going forward.
Thank you, Cliff. And actually, very important point. Manufacturing USA is a relatively new program, now has 17 institutes. 3 of those 17 are in the space of bio. So biopharmaceuticals with NIMBLE, biofabrication with BioFab USA. This is talking about printing 3D body parts, creating organs from your own tissue, and BioMade, unleashing a production using biological processes. So it really is the start of some astonishing new technologies. Let me go to Craig. So far, what have you found most satisfying in your role as a federal fellow?
Well, I think the others alluded to this. The most satisfying thing is being surrounded by helpful people and people who really share similar ideas on what the goals and what they want to do. And so I think it's really working with people to help amplify the things that you would want to do, that you realize that by yourself you could not do it. So the whole thing about teamwork, working as a team, and looking at big things to be able to go after. It's like an engineering challenge. You have something, a grand challenge, and you start to just chip away at little pieces. And that's the way I feel the most satisfying thing is that even though it seems like a monumental task, you feel like you're really getting something done and you're making a difference.
Anyone else want to jump in on something that they found really satisfying?
I'll jump in and just kind of plug this opportunity that I had as a fellow. One of the first tasks that I was able to be placed in as far as a leadership position was leading benchmarking efforts around other international innovation programs. And that tailored into networking with other groups that eventually led to a Germany workforce missions trip. And with that, I was able to, again, meet and discuss different workforce initiatives across different stakeholders across manufacturing. And like Craig said, it's been amazing just being able to work with different groups, and as a fellow have those opportunities that can branch outside of the federal government in order for our fellowship experience to be essentially more impactful for the office.
Thank you. So as we shared at the outset, we have 3 current and an immediate former fellow. Don finished his fellowship and he chose to actually join and become a Fed. Don, I thought you were retired, but we're so glad you're here. So I don't know what people's plans are, and I'm not trying to put anyone on the spot, but folks that would at the end of your fellow term, wherever, if you choose to go back to where you came from or do something different, this is an open-ended question. And you don't have to stay with the federal government to be involved with public policy development. I should stress that we are a democracy, all of us as citizens. You are welcome to make your voice known. That's really a cornerstone of how we can be how government can be responsive. So you don't need to join the federal government to have a voice in public policy. But my question here is to our current or our immediate past. How has the federal fellows experience, did it leave you hungry for more engagement in the public policy arena? And if so, what ways are you thinking of? I'll open it up to anyone on the panel that wants to tackle that one.
I'll dive in since everyone's being very quiet. I guess no one wants to show their cards. It's funny, about a month ago, I was at one of our institutes for a workforce meeting with all of the workforce people across the institutes. And one of them came up to me and she said, after you've seen this much, can you ever go back? And it was a fair question. You know, when you're in an institution, you see what happens at the institution. And if you're lucky, you get to be in a position where you see things beyond it. But you're ultimately focused on your own home institution, which is a wonderful thing. You get to focus on your students and your colleagues and helping them succeed. In this role, I get to see things across the country, different kinds of programs, different ways of interacting. I get to work with companies in different ways that I've never been able to before. And I don't know what I'm doing next, at least not officially, but I will say it definitely made me hungry to continue to be able to work across programs at this level.
I think that is, please.
Yeah. You know, I think I would, I think I'd also add to that and say that you're right. Involvement in policy doesn't have to end at the end of the fellowship. I would also say that if you join the federal government, maybe you don't have to stay there for a lifetime. As I commented earlier, I think there's some healthy opportunities for people to start in private industry, come into government, leave government, go back to industry, to help raise awareness and help facilitate some level of transparency of, you know, what's going on out there. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what the federal government does. And I think it can be helped by people serving in government that have connections to private industry and other areas outside government, and or can be helped by people going back and, you know, sharing their experience. I think overall the AAAS program, I was in the AAAS program as a AAAS fellow, and roughly half the people, half the fellows will go on with government service, which is fantastic. But about half will go and do something else. Of that half, or a quarter of the total, about a quarter of the total will go back to where they came from and do what they did. But the other 25%, or the remaining 25%, they'll go and do something entirely different. And I'm optimistic and love to hear some of those experiences from now my former fellows class, of people as they go on and they start to look at other areas. Hoping that they take with them the experience that they had in government and are able to share some of the positive aspects. And by the way, engage in areas where we do need to improve. So coming from a continuous improvement mindset, the past 3 decades, there's always opportunity to make things better. And so I think the AAAS program and service in federal government really provided that opportunity.
Thank you. I think we have exactly 60 seconds left. One of the benefits of working at NIST is we have the master clocks that synchronize the nation 16 billion times every day. We are there to synchronize the time for the grid, for the GPS, for the internet. And so in the now 50 seconds last, that's a good place to close our last 2 fellows. Let me just ask anyone else, how do you expect your experience as a fellow to inform or shape where you want your career to go next, whatever that role might be?
Yeah, I think that what I've done so far definitely, like Don had mentioned, left more questions as far as where I'd like to go at. So I think the opportunities are rich, and whatever I do, I think I probably didn't think about it before, but it's going to be good.
I think that's the perfect note to end on. So Aaron, Cliff, Craig, Don, thank you so much for serving on this panel. Thank you for serving your nation as federal fellows. And Kyle, our time is up. Back to you.
Well, Mike, I will extend my thanks as well, or thanks on behalf of all of us, to the 4 fellows and to yourself. Terrific sort of story this morning in terms of your experiences as federal fellows. It is clear that sense of answering the call to service that each of you did and finding a new meaningful way to make a difference in having done that in each of your ways, sort of joining that that again in your stories, that rich ecosystem of interesting, passionate people that are engaged in the work, both inside and outside the government, in terms of being able to do that, to have those, one of you termed fantastic conversations and rich explorations, where you can move things forward and get things done in ways that you might not have been able to do in private practice. It's a different realm from that perspective. So, a great story. It's it's a compliment to what George Sparks was offering in terms of his story and the work he's doing, sort of helping form that Institute for Science and Policy and engage the public and decision makers in that way. Each of you are doing it in a different way inside the Federal Fellows Program. At different points in your career. I really appreciated the way, Mike, you sort of drew that out in terms of, you can make a difference at different stages in your career. You can move back and forth. The opportunities are there. All right, with that, as we sort of heard those stories, both from George and from Mike and the 4 federal fellows with the Advanced Manufacturing Program, what I'd like to do is give the attendees here, all of you participating, an opportunity to explore this territory as well. And let me share my screen, and I want to set up the first of the exercises that we want to take on today. So in this exercise, and if you went to, I think what is now page 9 in your workbooks, you'll find an exercise roughly termed crossing the threshold. Now what we're going to do is use an idea that we've explored in the Change Lab several times before, and that's the idea of polarity management. And polarity management is a thinking process and a collaboration process that is designed to try and get at situations where there are seemingly 2 polar positions that can't be easily resolved. And instead of thinking that you have to choose one or the other, polarity management allows you to explore that territory with a view toward coming to an understanding of a both and conclusion. What are the opportunities here? So, for example, if you were using this framework of polarity thinking to think about a leadership style choice between a directive, clarity focused leadership style or a flexibility, empowering leadership style, you might, think about both the upsides and downsides of each of those possibilities from a polarity standpoint. On the left-hand side of that chart on page 10, in what is currently page 10, the upsides of a leadership style that focuses on clarity is that people receive clear directions and objectives, and they know what the leader stands for. But we can recognize there are downsides to that as well, that the leader can be seen as rigid or impractical or not caring what someone else thinks. So you move from that upside down to the downside analysis. Then in polarity management, you begin to think about, well, what are the upsides of the alternative, the other side of this polarity and the flexibility side? And what we may find is that the upsides of the polar opposite position begin to address the downsides of the other one. So in that sense, the upsides of being flexible is that the leader is seen as flexible, adaptable, empowering, and that they know that, I listen to them if I'm the, follower subordinate to that person. But we also, and those things, upsides, begin to, compensate for and address the rigidity or impracticality or the fact that the person doesn't think, the leader wouldn't care what we think. But we also know that there will be downsides to that position of flexibility, that can be ambiguity or lack of direction, and not knowing what the leader wants. And then again, we could cycle back through the upsides of the clarity position that could compensate for downsides. So that's the basic routine of polarity management. And what we're going to do is apply it to our thinking about engineering and public policy. And in the last panel, I love that idea. I think it was Craig noted that there's this third track that's possible in an engineering career between the technical track and the administrative track. And now there's this public policy track as an alternative in terms of your career and your career path. And here we want to play with that idea of the technical, if you will, and the public policy. So what's the, and use this polarity management framework to think about the technical problem solving as the traditional role of engineers versus a public policy service role for engineers. And what's the upside of the technical problem solving? What are the downsides of staying in that role as an engineer? And then what are the upsides of a public policy service role, many of which we've just heard about? And then what are the potential downsides of a public policy role? So we're going to go from the upper left-hand corner labeled A, the upsides of technical problem solving, to the downsides B, then to the upsides of public policy service, and then down in D down to the downsides. So that's the sort of agenda for the small group work. On the first page, each of the groups that we'll establish will have their own set of pages inside the workbook. We first ask you to very quickly introduce yourselves and then to designate some small group roles, a discussion leader, a recorder using the Google Doc, someone who will present, and then a timekeeper. We'll be using this framework from polarity management of the upsides and downsides of those two roles for engineers. And then there's a set of questions that are on the following pages. So about 30 minutes to explore each of those four quadrants. What are the upsides of technical problem solver? What are the downsides? What are quadrant B? What are the upsides of the public policy service role in quadrant C, and then the downsides of that? So move through that analysis of each of the four quadrants. And then there are some small group discussions that allow you to synthesize, pull together thinking or perspective that has occurred to you as you've gone through that polarity analysis. And then finally, in your small group, I'll give you about 20 minutes to do that. Pull together some key insights that you would like to report out to the whole group. So that'll be the exercise that we'd ask you to do. We're going to put you into 6 small groups. Each of the groups will be running through that process. Each of those 4 quadrants following the prompts that have been given in the workbook. And as I say, each of the groups will have their own workbook pages. So move to that Google Doc, find your pages for your group, and you can take your notes there. And then the presenter can use those pages in the notes that you've taken to aid their report out after the exercise is done. Now, we will note in our small group, what we're going to do is do the small group work before our lunch break. We'll pull everyone back from the small group work briefly, just to reconvene, and then we'll send you off for your lunch break. Then after the lunch break, as the whole group reconvenes, we'll ask you to report out, or will each of the groups to report out key insights from the discussion that they had in small group prior to lunch. Any questions about the exercise?
Kyle, it looks like if I set it at about 50 minutes, we'll be on schedule.
Yes, I think that's exactly right.
Okay.
Thanks, Mike. And if you can move people to small groups, that would be terrific. Good work on the good work in the small groups. I just scrolling through the different recording the workbook. That it looks like there was some pretty rich conversations. We're going to take a 25-minute break give people an opportunity to have a short lunch, although it might extend in terms of lunch and learn. So what I'd like to do is have everyone reconvene at it'll be, let's see, 12:50 Central. Is that right, Mike?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, 12:50 Central. We'll see everyone back in the. All right. Well, welcome back from lunch, everyone. What we want to do is to take time for each one of the groups to briefly report out some of the key insights that occurred both when you were doing the analysis using that polarity framework, the sort of upsides and downsides of each of those 2 stances. But also with regard to those small group discussion questions that we had included as the next step there. And so I'm just going to run through the groups. I'll share my screen and pull up the workbook, and we'll tab through to the appropriate page for each of the groups, and we can use that to report out to the whole group. So let me share the screen, and I'd like to start with group 1, and it looks like John Fernandez, is that right?
You got it. Yeah, good
is
afternoon.
The report out person for that group. So let me pull this up. All right, and John, you can kind of take us away. What kind of key insights emerged in your group as you went through this polarity analysis?
Did you want to go question by question or just overall?
No, just overall, some of the key insights, potentially, that you've included sort of at the end of the analysis.
Yep. Well, so when it comes to the sorry, I'm not on video here. When it comes to the policy space, engineers and engineering bring really a lot of credibility, right? Things are based on data. Things are based on technical analysis. There's a certain amount of trust that engineers might be able to bring to policy conversations. We sort of joked, the general public, are they going to trust the engineer or the lawyer in the room, right? Proven metrics, proven techniques. Engineers also seem to appreciate that what they're doing, it's a very tangible thing, right? It leads to things that we're building. They take a lot of pride in that work. Sometimes, though, this very heavy technical background can be a challenge in the policy space. I mean, really the engineers that are going to be, I don't know if this is a perfect way to put it, but most qualified to participate in the policy conversation, they have to bring some communication skills with them. They have to be able to take what is very complex technical information and turn it into a story. I mean, it was already said earlier in this summit today, policy is storytelling, policy is anecdotal, and there might be some very intelligent people in policy circles, but they are intelligent in something other than math or architecture or construction, whatever it may be. And to be able to get people on board with policy, it really needs to be communicated clearly. And for some folks that are highly technical, that could end up being a challenge. So I think those were some of the core takeaways. I am on the road and on a laptop, so the screen is very small to me.
Okay.
Anything that we may have missed here, and I invite anyone from Group 1 to jump in if there's anything critical. You know, I do, one point that was really made, and especially now when we think about the younger generation of engineers coming up, you could say there's almost some consequences to what we do in the policy space, and even to what engineers do. And dams were brought up, and it's such a great point. I mean, when you go back decades, when a lot of the hydroelectric system, when it was built in this country, we built all these dams because it was such a great thing, and everything could be quantified, and look how many electrons we get, and look how much and now so many decades later, we're tripping over ourselves trying to tear these things down. And there's really not a lot of conversations in terms of building large scale hydro.
Right.
And you know, while so many of the benefits can be quantified, sometimes there's a social risk, there's a long-term risk, there's an opportunity cost to building that I think sometimes is lost around really technical people. And so that's something very important to keep in mind, something to be communicated, and something that's very important to this critical younger generation that's coming up that we're spending so much time seeking out. So maybe I'll leave it with that. Again, anyone else from Group 1, if I missed anything important, please jump in.
Sounds like we're okay. I will, you know, I think that final point you were raising there, John, about the need for that systems perspective, that bigger view in each of these, I think, which really comes into play with regard to the public policy arena, is a significant one. Okay, thanks. So let's go to Group 2, and I'm not sure who was going to do the report out in Group 2. Deanna, Charlie, Sunny, and Sharon.
I can step in. We kind of we didn't follow your protocol. We were the typical students. And kind of one of our first thoughts was thinking about this as quadrant and separate spaces was not necessarily where we thought of it. And so that first point of the technical problem solver and the public policy servant are really the same, one and the same. Lots of overlap in terms of the skills. And so maybe what we need to start thinking about is engineering policymakers that are people that straddle both of those roles, that bring the collaboration from both sides.
Nice.
We had a nice discussion about thinking about at what levels do engineers get involved, and thinking about day-to-day practice of engineers, project approvals, and how that's policy. And then a discussion about reacting to policies versus the proactively affecting policies. And again, thinking about that across the gamut of local, regional, state, federal, and the iteration process of policy making, and how that really mimics the same idea of the engineering design process. And then a third point that came up was the idea about the government as the place for real change in terms of policy versus the private sector in terms of its speed and reaction to innovation. I think that was a point that Mike had brought up, that the technology is moving so much faster than government and policy. And so in terms of bridging this gap or pushing more engineers into policy, is it not just pushing into policy per se, but also thinking about private sector and where that is having a policy impact that might also be a good place to bring engineers into that path.
Okay. And that might be part of that engineering policymaker stance that you started with in terms of being able to bridge that technology and the public sector sort of sides of things.
Yeah.
All right, excellent. Let's go to group 3. And here it looks like presenter Vincent.
Hello, Kyle. Thank you.
Hi.
So in our completion of this quadrant exercise, we contrasted these two roles, and those contrasts could be summarized in 3 major topics: skills, benefits, and confidence. So for skills, for a technical person may have all the skills that make them a good designer: knowledge of codes, abilities, technical ability to synthesize technical information and translate it into others. And then for the policy maker or informer role, you have to build on these and develop communication skills, abilities to synthesize technical problems, remove jargon, and remove ambiguity to present solutions that policymakers and the public could understand more simply. So you have these communication skills that must be built over the technical. And then for benefits, we talked about the translation from project-specific benefits, how a specific project would benefit a community and peoples that use it, and then how the policymaker will bring benefits to many projects. So in that way, you increase your impact by moving between these roles. And the challenge to that, I figured, was confidence or knowledge, in which, to someone who's studied an engineering topic at school, the engineering career path is very well laid out in a linear fashion to be a practicing engineer, a manager, and maybe an executive. But the move to policy is much more unclear and potentially frightening. So our conclusion in this are these 2 key insights, which is 1, to empower and inform technical workers that their existing skills and knowledge have grand potential to inform public policy and improve society and reap these wide benefits. And that's then to make use of that, you need a suite of tools. Firstly, to identify people who have the capacity to develop the communication skills that will be required for public policy, and then a suite of tools to train those people, to inform them on what public policy roles would be and to train them in working in them.
All right, Vincent, thank you. I will note that notion of needing that suite of tools and you know, having places where you can be exposed to and learn those tools. We're going to hear from Deanna Matthews as one of our thought leaders here coming up about, you know, how she and others at Carnegie Mellon go about building that capacity and that interest in students in just a moment. So, okay, good work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Group 4. And the presenter is Chelsea.
Hello.
Hi.
We had a really awesome conversation talking about all of this. So part of some of the key points here that we came up with are, So our key insights were that we are influential as technical professionals on public policy, and it's really up to the technical professionals to get involved and be visible and to express ourselves and our thoughts on certain issues, and to consider the communication of what we are talking about to the public policy and to the communities at large, so they really understand our role and can learn to trust us. So, and the more that we work with the public and legislators, the more recognition we're going to get, and the more trust we're going to have from our respective communities. So what we kind of talked about a little bit for the upsides of the public policy service role is that we are experts in our field, and we have the ability to help solve problems. We are not necessarily politicians, but being able to communicate well and share our understanding of our respective areas of interest, we can help to bring about good policies and very importantly also defeat bad policies. And we can also be part of the creative process of coming up with these policy ideas. Another upside is that engagement is rewarding. A lot of us are in this field because we are interested in it, and we've become experts in it, and sharing our knowledge to create a better world is, really a big important thing for everyone who's on this call, I'm sure. Another thing is that we are generally positive about our future and the ability to influence and solve problems because we are part of solving the problems. I think it's important to share that optimism with people, that there are probable solutions that will work for certain issues. So some of the downsides are difficulties, not necessarily a downside, but we talked about how our world of engineering and science is relatively black and white. The world around us is, more nuanced. We have a lot of different cultures, a lot of different interested parties, a lot of histories, communities, that it's hard to integrate all of those ideas while also checking the boxes for the technical portions of what we do. So I think that comes back, or we think that comes back to communication and being able to get input from different parts of the community.
Great.
Thanks.
All right. That last point you're making in terms of the shift in mindset that engineers need to make between the sort of black and white thinking, or that sense that, you can be precise and to that nuanced thinking that will be present in a public policy world is significant. I thought the other thing that you noted there about trust is that there's almost a reinforcing cycle there in terms of trust, that the more engineers are engaged, they have the opportunity to build trust in that public setting. The more trust, the more willing the public is to try and pull the engineers in to be more engaged. And I think that reinforcing cycle is significant. So thank you, Chelsea. Let's go on to group 5. And looks like Brandon.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think the 4 groups before us hit on most of our key points, but I do want to kind of touch on a few of the areas that we also thought were important. And I think one was, as you noted, the needing to get involved for engineers, starting kind of at that college level of understanding that public policy is an area that engineers can get involved in, and it's important for them to be part of, because from what our discussions were is that it's about fixing a problem and kind of setting up that career path of how to go from starting to manager, and not necessarily how to tackle these broad-based policy issues. One of the other things we did want to note was getting involved in public service is also a way to give back, and that addressing some of these issues, whether it be with an association, serving on like a policy committee, whether it be writing a letter to a congressman or congresswoman, whether it be addressing in a public newsletter or academia of some type of policy issue that you generally care about, it's an opportunity to get involved. But with that, we also want to make sure that as we go through these steps, it's important to make sure that we do have the historic reference of these policy issues, have done the research to address the problems, and be aware that there are two sides to every argument, and addressing a public policy issue is something that takes a big community of people to listen to understand, and then to ultimately communicate. And kind of, as you just noted, the public always doesn't necessarily understand how important engineers are, but when they are put in those situations, it's generally felt that the public appreciates the role of an engineer and what they do. And so it's an opportunity to, as you noted earlier, to get them involved, to tell the story, to share their experiences and their technical experiences and how they can help build a better sound policy by being part of the conversation.
Okay.
So those are kind of our key points for what we discussed.
All right, thanks, Brenda. Yeah, and again, I think that, the note that you're making about, as you move into public policy, suddenly you're engaged in a much bigger community, many more people, many more interests. And again, that nuance that we spoke of with the previous group is going to be very present in terms of not engaging that bigger community and all the different views that they might have. Okay, and finally with group 6. Carlene?
Yeah. Again, I think a lot of the points have already been talked about, but really at the end, we came to the conclusion that, it's not quite as, there are some parallel paths to engineering. So we are problem solvers. And by being involved in public policy, we're still solving those problems, but we have the opportunity to perhaps impact a greater or more global set of solutions than just maybe, by a project by-project basis. So that's, I think, a great opportunity for engineers to elevate their involvement in those, kind of big, hairy, audacious goals that we talk about, or messy problems. And I think engineers in general, there's this whole soft skill set that we need to help with public policy, but we need to overcome the fear and just start somewhere, start working on it. And, a lot of times our fears is that the risks are greater than the rewards, when really the opposite is true. And that we no longer have the luxury to just kind of sit back and let others make those decisions for us, that we need to really be part of the solution. So that's kind of a very quick summary of ours.
All right. Thanks, Carlene. Let me stop the share and just briefly allow anyone else that wants to bring up any points that haven't been made by the presenters that showed up in your small group conversations that you wanted to highlight.
I think that one of the things that engineers bring to the public policy arena is an ethical approach that sometimes is lacking in other groups.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. That had come up in the small group that I was with, Carlene and Lauren as well, is that, and in that grounding in ethics and values can be one of those confidence builders that others have about the engineer's participation. Yeah. Anything else by others?
Kyle, one point, we often, all the time, we hear about engineers being problem solvers. It's the mantra, right? Public policy involvement is defining the problems we're going to work on, not just accepting what's handed to us by others.
Right. Thanks, Mike. All right, well, I think we're going to move on, and we want to compliment the contributions that were made by George and the Federal Fellows panel in terms of their answering this call to service. with stories from 3 additional leaders in the engineering community that have answered that call to service and have crossed the threshold and are each in their own way making contributions in the public policy realm. We're going to start with Deanna Matthews, who is the she's a teaching professor and associate at Carnegie Mellon University, but particularly she's the department head for undergraduate affairs in the engineering and public policy program that they have there. And as we learned our way into sort of the breadth of engineering public policy programs that are available out in academia, Carnegie Mellon was held up by any number of people as really one of the premier schools for doing this. So we're really pleased to have Deanna with us participating in this program and helping us learn a little bit about what they're up to at Carnegie Mellon, but also her personal story in terms of choosing what she's doing as a way of expressing her engagement in public policy. So Deanna, I'll turn it over to you. And I wonder, Deanna, are you muted?
Yes, you are, Deanna. Yep.
All right. Still haven't figured it all out, even from all those semester classes. So I'm going to correct how I'm the associate department head, because my students often make me the department head, and I do not want that job. So
I'm sorry,
department
Deanna.
head for undergraduate affairs.
Right.
And I'll talk a little bit about what we do here at Carnegie Mellon in our department, but I'd like to think of it as perhaps more of an education perspective more broadly. So that's why I stuck that in the title. I will also note that Sharon Jones, who's one of the participants today, is a graduate of our program as well. And so it's happy she can also chime in with her thoughts in this space as well. And so I'll talk a little bit, a quick my perspectives and biases, talk about our programs at CMU, the curricula and courses, and some careers and pathways. And then at the end, I have sort of challenges in each of those spaces. They didn't align exactly to those 5, but I wanted to make sure I talked a little bit about those challenges. So I think the big thing that I want to pull in is, I work as a professor and an academic advisor. I'm at Carnegie Mellon University, which is a research-intensive, PhD granting, highly selective undergraduate institution. We have lots of international students where public policy is a whole different ballgame. And generally these students from upper-class socioeconomic backgrounds. I'll put this link, if I can find my cursor, into the chat. I was just on a program that was talking about DEI initiatives. And so this academic wheel of privilege, if you scroll halfway down the link, you'll get to it. It's a lovely little, looks like this. But it really helps, I think, bring out some of the pieces that I'm bringing to this discussion and that were mentioned earlier in terms of the different organizations that the NIST fellows were coming from, as well as the breadth of people that we would want to target. So keep in mind that anything that I'm talking about, there's non-engineers with technical backgrounds that I think are also important to this. How do we engage students and who are at less research intensive and primarily undergraduate institutions? How do we get the breadth from historically Black colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions, tribal colleges, and really just a broader political and economic spectrum of students? And so, my perspective is very much what we have here student-wise at CMU. So, and that's not the only students that we would need to bring to this discussion. So I'll spend a minute or two talking about our CMU programs and curricula. And I've really just boiled it down, and I'm happy to answer questions. And if you put things in the chat, that's fine. So engineering and public policy is a department. We're housed in our College of Engineering at Carnegie Mellon University, along with civil and environmental engineering, chemical engineering, material science and engineering, mechanical engineering, electrical and computer engineering, and a biomedical engineering departments. And so those are the other fields, primary fields of engineering that we have. The department was established in 1970, so we've been around for a very long time. It first was an undergrad program. The PhD program came a few years later, and we really just formally established an MS and EPP just recently in 2020. And so the history of the department is very diverse in terms of the people who have come through, the problems that we have worked on. We do have 2 different undergraduate programs, and again, trying to branch out just from that engineering. So we have engineering and public policy, as well as science, technology, and public policy. It's just dependent on what degree the underlying student, the program they're going to be in, the master's and the doctorate. And I gave you some cohort sizes and the program sizes as well. The program size for undergraduate is about 3 years worth of students, sophomores, juniors, seniors. The doctorate students are here for about 5 years. So they're comparable. The master's program is just getting started again, so that's why that is so small. But the big point that I want to make here is that that's 75 to 90 students. It is less than 10% of our CMU College of Engineering population of undergraduates. And so there's been this talk in terms of like bringing people into this fold and making people realize, even in an institution where this is one of the longer standing engineering departments in our college, we are well known. I can only attract 10% of our engineering population to decide that this is an interesting place for them to pursue what it is that they want to do. So keep that in mind. Part of it is this idea of what exactly is engineering and public policy? And I threw this slide in because this is what I use to try to convince students and help them to really understand how is it that this discipline that they also might still be a mystery of engineering as their first year students just getting started on their college careers. How is this weird nebulous thing that I also don't understand as engineering? How does it also connect with this public policy piece, which I also don't understand? But really trying to get them to see that there's this idea of those connections between engineering and society, and that the students that appreciate that there is that connection and that that's where they want to be are the kinds of students that come and investigate our program. Within EPP, we have these 5 focus areas of our research. So we do climate, environment, energy systems, risk, technology, innovation policy, and information communication technology. Some of our technology innovation policy work is actually what was highlighted earlier with the NIST folks thinking about the National Network for Critical Technology Strategy program that faculty here in EPP are running. So one of the interesting things about us as a department is we are broad in terms of our reach of policy issues to the extent that they fall in these 5 buckets. But when we think about doing climate and environment, we're doing carbon capture, we're doing water systems, we're thinking about climate modeling and air systems modeling. We're thinking about energy and transportation systems. So from that perspective, it's very broad. What you may see in some other schools is a particular department that might also have policy added on, keeping some of their focus more narrow, just in that particular space. So at the same time, as much as we're broad on that, this also limits the reach on the problems that we do and the students that we might attract. Again, when I talk about this being 10% of the student population of our engineering students, I have a great number of students that are in our civil engineering program and our new environmental engineering program. From the other departments, I may or may have 3 or 4 students at any given time. Maybe I have 1 electrical and computer engineer. And so even though we have a strong group of people that are looking at information and communication technology issues, that disconnect, not seeing why my particular area of study is important in this space, is still something that's difficult for us to translate over to students. I tried really hard to get these things to line up, and then I just had to give up. So across our different programs, it's a mix of policy plus analysis plus technical understanding. And again, the comment that my group came up with before was that it's not about technical problem solvers and public policy service being too separate. To us, these things are really blended together. Our undergraduate program works only as an additional major. So you can't just come and get an undergraduate degree in EPP. You have to be some other kind of engineer plus EPP on top of it. The master's and the doctoral degrees stand alone. But as you look across the 3 different columns, we really have made our curricular programs very similar. We really want students to have a core that's about policy basis and policy analysis. And then at the master's and the doctoral level, there's a lot of depth in the quantitative methods that you would use for policy analysis. So there's a strong focus in working with data, using computer programming, doing statistical analysis and other kinds of modeling in a very strong, defensible way. The other spaces are to really branch students out to get that policy and the social side. So economics, decision-making, the communication pieces are all really important. And another big piece of our programs is really thinking about, you have to have that depth in the quantitative methods. You also have to have that depth in the social science and policy pieces. And so finding the balance across those 2 spaces so that a student has the breadth that they need. There's a lot of, the third piece is that technical understanding. For undergraduates, that's going to come from their primary major. Everything that they're doing to become a true engineer falls into that. For our master's and doctoral students, we have elective courses and expect them to go out and get that background in the engineering systems that are of interest to them. For our undergraduate students, we have projects courses and some other elective courses. So again, they get that technology focus. And my next couple of slides will focus on, from the undergraduate perspective, those technology electives and the capstone. So this is just an example list of some of the courses that we offer students. And again, to give you the idea of the breadth that we have in terms of our courses, but also those connections that we're making. Really trying to have students understand this is how working in this space, you have to have that technical knowledge, but you have to bring to it the understanding of those social systems. One of the great pieces about how our department operates is you don't have to be in our programs to take these classes, and they end up counting for other requirements for students. So it's a really interesting blend of undergraduates and graduate students in our program and not in our program that come in and take these courses. For the EPP projects course, this is our capstone course for the undergraduate program. And one of the things I like to stress to the students, families, whoever, is that one of the big things is that there's those durable core skills. And these are pieces that were commented on throughout the morning, thinking about bringing structure to some sort of complex problems, understanding the different range of analyses that you really need to do, working in an interdisciplinary space. This is one of the few capstone that we have on campus that has non-engineers, engineers, and engineers across all of the different spaces working together. A lot of collaboration, project management, and the communication skills. In terms of how the course is designed, the big thing that's different is it's like our own work. There is one single project topic, but there might be multiple issues. And part of what the students do is go out and figure out, this is the economic piece that we might want to look at. Here's a DEI or an equity piece that we might want to look at. Here's a technology space. Here's the economic space that we might want to look at. And they really decide, where is it that we're going to go within this class. They're then working in their small groups with a targeted focus. We have an advisory board where they do their formal presentations and report back. So again, seeing how all of those different skills that you need as an undergrad in engineering, but that also lend themselves to different types of careers at all levels, and putting that policy piece into it overall. Here's just a list of some recent past topics in that course. I was part of the one that was doing the public transit in a post-pandemic and remote work world. So one group was really one group decided they wanted to look at scooters. We now have scooters around campus, and they really wanted to understand what was that last mile and how different populations would use those scooters now to get to work. Another group was really looking at how we need to reconfigure how Pittsburgh has our bus system, because everybody's not going to downtown anymore. And then also one of the results of the pandemic was the Pittsburgh Regional Transit was able to identify very clearly who our transit dependent population was, because they kept riding the bus every single day. We figured out which stops that they were coming from, which stops they were going to. And so being able to do the data analysis for them to think about how to reconfigure the bus stops. So one of the things that really engages students in this projects course and within our program is this idea of being able to examine these bigger problems, seeing how that technology piece and all of the other pieces really go back and forth and connect to each other. And a comment that I often hear from students is, it's a nice change from homework, homework, test, homework, homework, test, to seeing how all of that, those quantitative problem solving is actually going to make a difference in what they're doing in the real world. In terms of careers and trajectories, this is what I always hear, but I don't want to work in government, right? And that's what we've been hearing a lot. And I will say that the majority of our undergraduate alumni do not work in government. But this is how we try to tap into them, why they would want to come and learn in this space of engineering and public policy, because there are these distinct spaces where your job, even as a very technical problem solver, engineer, is going to have those interactions. And so this is the justification that we give to students. This is a snapshot for our undergrad alumni. A lot stay around and do a 5th-year technical master's and then go get a technical job, couple in a PhD in law. Of a lot of students that are going into consulting, mostly business consulting, but also it can be industry focused, a lot of urban planning and transportation interest. A lot of students go to finance just because it pays a lot. That's a draw. And then a lot of industry, but that is mostly very technical driven, what you would anticipate an engineering student to get as a first job. We might see them switch later. My 5 and 10 year out alums are doing very different things that do tend to lean perhaps more towards those broader cooperative intersecting skills that they have, but still pretty typical in terms of technical. Those are my summer 22, what my students were doing. So again, national labs, a lot of research base is of interest during the summers. In terms of our graduate alumni, again, our master's program is very new, so we don't have a lot of graduates as of yet. Several are going to doctoral programs and elsewhere, but a big interest is going into business and engineering consulting. And again, from the engineering consulting, it tends to be, say, energy consulting firms or IT consulting firms. PhD programs, some into academia, but it's far and few these days. Consulting, national labs. We do have quite a bit that are now in US federal government agencies. And as Mike noted earlier, it's not doing the I'm making the regulation, it's I'm putting the policy into place type jobs. That's what they're doing there. So a lot across in those leadership deputy director type roles. In terms of challenges, and hopefully this sparks discussion rather than making us frustrated. When I think about programs or curricular courses, it's hard to start this new program. I don't know if we would be able to establish an EPP today. It's not something that is going to draw in a ton of money to our school. And so that's just the reality of it. And so, you know, it was wonderful to see that list of programs that came with the agenda. How do we get those to merge? And it's going to be a challenge. What's the breadth that we can all bring into this? We don't want it to be just civil and environmental engineering. We want it to be across all engineering. A big deterrent is that if you have, as a faculty member, if you don't know something about policy, you're not going to want to teach it. You're not going to want to put it into your course, which limits how many students are going to get exposed. You know, maybe on the plus side, ABET, which is the accreditation board, has an outcome of consideration of public health, safety, welfare, global, cultural, social, economic, and economic factors. So they'll get a little bit, still a long way to go. On the student side, again, I think that there's the students that are coming into my program, at least, it's all about STEM. That's what their parents have drilled into them. You need to get a STEM job. They also don't want to write. That communication piece is always going to be hard. It's hard to explain to somebody what this program is. And so you have parents that are very skeptical. Why are you not doing a minor in business? Why are you doing this EPP thing? I don't know what that is. And so how do we get something like this program to capture more students with different kinds of experiences when the programs aren't necessarily being developed at lots of different schools? I do think a plus inside of the student space, and again, I feel like this was mentioned earlier, these students are really politically active in spaces where we might not think about the technical background as being essential to thinking about the solutions. Obviously, with climate change, yes. But my students are very politically active in gender, sexual orientation pieces, or AI and social media. And so helping them to understand that their technical knowledge in these spaces can help within the politically active side of them is a space where they can come together. From the gender and sexual orientation, it's things like, what are the ethics for different kinds of biomedical engineering advances that we're making? One of the big discussions we're having right now within our department and within our college is on data collection for gender and sexual orientation and matching data sets longitudinally. And so how do you, if you're really interested in this and you want it to stop, change what the questions say, maybe what you need to do is come at it with, well, I'm going to solve the problem of the data side. and the data collection piece. And then in terms of careers and trajectory, again, not only is it difficult for me to explain to students what this is, students to explain to parents, then you have to explain it to a recruiter. What is this EPP thing? And I do think that a lot of students feel I have to have that technical job first. I really have to understand the business, understand the engineering. And I know from my own perspective that that's what really helps me now, is when I think back to the engineering and technology work that I did in my first jobs. And again, we heard this earlier today, you know, every professional that I talk to, those professional skills that we're teaching, the data analytics, the communication, the problem, the decision-making, how to work with people, bringing in all the stakeholders, all of that non-engineering knowledge is critical. So I think there's a space for this to change. We just have to figure out how to make it happen. And lastly, this idea of policy and government jobs. Our group had this question of, is it service? Is that part of the problem? That we need to reframe it, that it's not service, that it's a job. It's a valid career. I don't think students necessarily understand what those career pathways are. They see government as elected officials. And if that's viewed as being very political, it's not what necessarily interests them. How do we merge students and interest into local, regional, state, federal government? So thinking broadly there, the pay gap and security clearance time, you know, these are real issues for students that have loans to pay off and need to have a job right at the end of graduation. We have a lot of international students that aren't going to get hired here, at least back in their home countries, most definitely. And then again, I think what we need to do in terms of that first bullet is helping people understand that the implementation of the laws is policy. And Mike said that earlier during his talk. So how do we focus our efforts on, yeah, the government does that. You want to do programming, you want to be involved in AI. Yeah, the government does that. And so helping students to figure out that this is a career, perhaps, rather than seeing it as service, it may help shift that mentality. This is my last slide, and I really struggled. I wanted to put more text here, but I couldn't figure out how to wrap it up. I felt there was a lot of challenges, and that maybe our exercise was going there. Creating engineers with a difference is sort of our little tagline that we use here in EPP. But I do think that that's where we need to go. How we do it, I think it's going to be an interesting process.
All right, thanks, Deanna. I mean, great story in terms of the good work being done, you know, by you and colleagues and the students at Carnegie Mellon, and sort of, you know, beginning, you know, raising the awareness and the importance of this EPP work that you know, is embedded with that program. So thank you for that story. You know, and I think, you know, that second last slide about sort of reframing from service to career and career pathways actually, you know, sets up our next thought leader contribution here, where we've asked Jimmy Haig to talk about his choice to pursue a career engaged in public policy as a policy advisor, but to do it again, not as an elected official, but to do it from a seat within a nonprofit, and to affect policy through the work that the nonprofit and, you know, that he can do within that context. So I'd like, you know, Jimmy is the policy advisor on federal freshwater priorities, but comes at this as an engineer and scientist, really particularly interested in nature-based solutions, freshwater, sort of water infrastructure and related things, you know, within that field. But, you know, has a background sort of working in Congress as a staff member, and, you know, in this realm with regard to the Nature Conservancy. So with that, I'll invite Jimmy, please take over.
Thanks, Kyle. I appreciate it, and really thanks for having me. Really, just an honor to be for the Nature Conservancy to be involved in this, and for me as well to really flattered that you'd want to hear my perspective on this. I do get to work with a lot of engineers in my policy work, so I'm excited to talk to you all today. Really appreciate the Engineering Change Lab organizing this summit. You know, I like Kyle said, I've made this my career. I am a registered lobbyist. I do this as a full-time job. You know, a lot of my work is internally focused at the Nature Conservancy, but really almost everything that I do is some type of lobbying, effectively, either looking at Congress or looking at the executive agencies. So of course I'm a little biased, but I do think that we all have a voice. We should all have a voice in the decisions that are being made, especially those decisions that are being made by our governments, both for our benefit as well as a benefit for our future generations. I've really enjoyed the discussion so far. I really appreciate all this. I really enjoyed the NIST panel earlier. In an earlier part of my career, I got to work with NIST a lot. And really that's just a crown jewel in terms of our science enterprise in this country, and as well as the important work for commerce in this country and globally too. So I was really excited to reconnect with some of those concepts from that panel. And I'm really just thrilled that you all have decided to take your time to think about this, to show up today, to have a discussion about the public policy and potentially your greater role in it. You know, I do approach this as an advocate. I see it as an advocate for the common good through environmental conservation. Certainly you guys could also have a role as engineers acting in your professional interest, maybe in a narrow professional interest, but also as in potentially a very broader context as well. And we've talked about a lot of different ways that you can engage. And also say I grew up in a family of engineers, so I feel a lot more kinship sitting with this group than I do sitting with the lawyers and the biologists that I usually spend my working days with. Let me pull up my slides for today. So I thought for the time I have today, I'm going to start out with an introduction to who I am, how I got into public policy, and why. Talk a little bit about my organization, the Nature Conservancy, for those of you who may not be too aware of it, but I can also talk in some detail about our policy work. Then I'm going to discuss a little bit more detail why the Nature Conservancy has decided to go all in on public policy engagement, and why I think the engineering community should consider doing the same thing. And then try to just wrap it up with a few things to consider as you pursue this discussion further, and a few things to watch out for as you get more involved in policy. And I'll be happy to take any questions that you have if there is time for it. I'll also share my email address a little bit later, so you can reach out to me separately and we can have a discussion offline, and just have a longer discussion. I'm always open to that kind of thing. So I guess one of the first things I should say, and one of the first things you should know about me is that I have an outdated profile photo. That photo was taken many years and a good shave away from. I'm now many years and a good shave away from when this photo was taken, but it's still the best one I've got. So apologies for the false advertising. My title is Senior Water Policy Advisor for the Nature Conservancy, so I do focus on the federal policy in the United States as it impacts freshwater conservation. So in other words, what I don't do is I don't do international policy, I don't do policies at the state or local level, and I don't work on policies on land or marine conservation, except to the extent that those things have a nexus with freshwater conservation in the United States. And there certainly is a lot of nexus with all those topics. Water is kind of connected to everything in this world, but I try to focus as much as I can on that narrow sphere of freshwater. And I work with the Nature Conservancy's chapters in all 50 states across the United States, as well as many external partners to influence how Congress and federal agencies, and for me particularly, that means the Bureau of Reclamation and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, both of which employ a lot of engineers in their work. And I work with them, both Congress and those agencies, to try to influence how we conserve and manage freshwater resources in this country. So originally I came into policy from a science background, actually. I'm trained as a physicist, but I diverged from my academic astronomy track pretty early in my career to work on science policy. I made an educated guess at that time that working in government would be a nice counterbalance to some of the shortcomings that I felt studying the sources of X-ray emission from other galaxies in graduate school. You know, this was probably my call to service moment of feeling that disconnect from real people and real world events, and really just looking literally outside of our galaxy in my graduate school work. And so I felt like government service would fill some of those voids that I was feeling. And I think that guess proved correct, at least it has so far. So I traded a lab in the basement of the astronomy building for an office in the halls of Congress. So I got a job working for the Science Committee of the U.S. House of Representatives, literally by walking the halls of Congress looking for an internship. And I would not recommend that approach. It wasn't a smart or effective way to get into this business then, and it's even less so now. Nevertheless, it has worked out for me. You know, in those early days there, in the early 2000s, it was this was a time when the scientific debates about whether climate change was occurring, whether it was human caused, they were raging, and so it was pretty easy for me to shift from my science policy focus into more of an environmental policy focus, which I did during a master's program out in Colorado. From there, I took a job in the US Senate where I developed specific expertise on freshwater conservation policy. And then when I felt it was time to leave Congress and leave government service, I took a job with a small nonprofit here in Washington, D.C. that was focused on the interests of hunters and anglers from a conservation perspective. And from there, I took this job at the Nature Conservancy, which I've held for about 7 years now. So I work on policy at the federal level mostly through serendipity. I just happened to be in graduate school near Washington, D.C. When I made this career shift. But I do enjoy working at the federal level because many of the challenges we face, especially the big ones, can best, if not only be addressed through federal action. So for example, the federal government is an indispensable, a necessary actor in the interstate challenge of addressing drought in the Colorado River Basin or responding to a multi-billion-dollar coastal storm disaster. And I think a lot of the discussion today has been talking about federal level policy work. Nevertheless, I've seen the impact that state, local, tribal policy discussions and decisions can have, and I'd urge you to think about all those levels of government.
Yeah, hey, Jimmy, your slides disappeared. I don't know what happened there, but.
Oh yeah, that's okay. I'll put them back up in a second.
You're gonna put them back? Very good, thanks.
Can only have you look at my outdated profile photo for so long.
Okay.
So I encourage you to look at all those levels of government when you're thinking about policy engagement, and you can have in my experience, what I've seen, you can have a much more tangible and it's almost immediate impact through policy work when you're working really close to home. But as a general rule, I enjoy working with policy because it's inherently about problem solving. This is a concept that's been brought up a couple of times, especially about how this is something engineers can relate to as problem solvers. And these problems for me have been much more challenging than the ones that I saw in my physical science, in school, my physical sciences problems, because when you add economics and sociology and history and all these other social science considerations, these problems become much more complex, and they don't have one correct or clear answer. However, ultimately it does become, for me, a lot more satisfying when you can build consensus in a diverse group of stakeholders around a solution for the common good. And that's what TNC is best at. And for the problems we are trying to solve, we want to and feel it's necessary that we design solutions that offer multiple benefits for all those involved. And that's what's going to produce the durable results and build a future where people and nature can thrive. So a little bit, if you're not familiar with the Nature Conservancy, we are a global conservation organization dedicated to conserving the lands and waters on which all life depends. We're guided by science and create innovative, on-the-ground solutions to the world's toughest challenges. We work in all 50 states and over 70 countries using a collaborative approach that engages local communities, governments, the private sector, and others. We got our start in the 1950s with just a handful of volunteers in New York and have grown dramatically since then. By the 1970s, we had 4 offices and 150 staff. And by the 90s, we had 250 offices and 2,000 staff. And now, thanks to the benefits of remote work, we have probably an uncountable number of offices and over 5,000 staff working across 79 countries. So if you look on this map, those countries in dark green are the places where we've got permanent full-time staff living and working on our programs. That lighter green color is where we have programs or projects in operation, but not necessarily staff permanently based. And as we've grown, the Nature Conservancy has grown, our ambitions have grown as well. We've moved from a model that is trying to conserve land acre by acre to addressing the most pressing global environmental challenges of our time. For us, we identify those as climate change and biodiversity loss. And among the tools that we've developed to achieve those goals, policy is foremost for its ability to scale up our impact. So in the United States, we're focused on policies to enable the clean energy transition and policies to achieve a goal of conserving 30% of the lands, waters, and oceans by the year 2030. I'll give you a couple examples of why the Nature Conservancy engages on policy by way of looking at the outcomes from our policy engagement. And I just, note I've used the U.S. Capitol for this slide. These examples that I'm about to give are legislative, but please keep in mind, several folks have mentioned there are tremendous policy opportunities on the administrative branch as well. Congress really chews up a lot of the oxygen in the room, makes good fodder for your daily news, for your cable news channels. But what happens under the radar at federal agencies can be just as powerful or more so. Actually, in my experience, you can get more bang for your buck, figuratively speaking, of course, by working with the agencies because everyone else focuses so much on Congress. Nevertheless, let me give you a couple examples because TNC's 2 biggest policy wins came from legislation passed by Congress over the last 2 years. The first of which is the Inflation Reduction Act, which George Sparks mentioned at the top, quoting Senator Hickenlooper as saying it was a stack of stuff, which is probably a pretty decent description of it. So in the year 2022, Congress passed and the president signed into law the Inflation Reduction Act. It's about $740 billion piece of legislation in total. And of that, $370 billion is for investments in climate mitigation and resilience programs. This was by far the biggest step the United States has taken to address climate change. It's going to produce about a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, putting the United States within reach of its commitments under the Paris Agreement. Near and dear to my heart, though, it included $4 billion to address the drought conditions out west and especially in the Colorado River Basin. Now, the year before that, Congress passed and the president signed into law the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. This was slightly smaller at $50 billion, but it was spent over 5 years instead of 10. And it contained investments in all kinds of critical infrastructure, clean energy, water, and transportation, as well as the natural infrastructure of this country that produces clean water and clean air benefits, not to mention creating habitat for fish and wildlife. I want to mention these examples because of their sheer scale. In DC, a lot of my work, we kind of talk about tens of millions of dollar programs, willy-nilly over coffee. But I mean, the scale of these 2 bills was truly staggering. And there is just no other way that I've seen to generate this kind of investment and the kinds of outcomes that the Nature Conservancy wants to see other than through federal policy. It may have seemed to some of the outside observers like both of these bills came together over the course of a year or 2, but in reality, groups like the Nature Conservancy have been working on the concepts and the specifics that made up these bills for 5, 10 years or more. And that long-term engagement really paid off big for us with both these accomplishments. And for the Nature Conservancy policy, we see it as the greatest pathway to transformational change. We've made an organization-wide commitment to a nonpartisan, science-based approach to policy based on our many years of history with policy, and in my opinion, a best-in-class policy team. Our greatest strength is that we have the ability to leverage an on-the-ground presence in all 50 states, combined with over 500 staff scientists and many other conservation practitioners, as well as our very engaged boards of trustees to impact policy at all levels of government. There's just not many other organizations that I'm aware of that have so many resources to draw on for policy advocacy. It makes it a great place for me to work, and is one of the main reasons we're so successful with Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Of course, many other groups and people in DC can claim credit for many parts of both bills, and that's the thing about working in policy. When it's successful, it's easy to say that success has many fathers, and it is true. So, relatively briefly, because I'm probably starting to run low on time, but a summary of the Nature Conservancy's policy priorities. The climate and land and water priorities probably won't surprise you, and I've touched on them a little bit. A couple of the others that are more universal that might also apply in an engineering community as well. We spend a lot of time working on the annual budget and appropriations process through the agencies and Congress, and this cuts across all the issues that the Nature Conservancy works on, and really all the issues that you would be interested in as engineers as well. We invest a lot of capacity into influencing this process, but I got to say that if you want to do it well, it's very difficult to do it, and you do need to learn a lot of expertise. So I've been working on our budget appropriation cycles for probably close to 15 years now, and I'm still trying to figure out the right way to plug into it and shape it, but we do have good successes there. We're also taking the time to intentionally examine our work through the lens of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, so that those concepts can better inform our policy and advocacy priorities. This effort has revealed our gaps and limitations in policy expertise, knowledge, as well as resource capacity. But we are adapting now by hiring new staff, as well as investing in the training of all of our staff and how we approach DEIJ topics in all our work. And then finally, despite the impressive resources at the Nature Conservancy, we still can't do everything that we'd like to do. So we must find ways to prioritize our policy work to really think about the places where our voice matters, where it can change the outcome, and where we can have the greatest impact. And I think this is a pernicious challenge that we all face in every aspects of our jobs, but certainly if you're going to be working on policy, nobody likes to say no to a good idea, but sometimes it's just necessary so that you can execute strategies effectively. And I'm just going to try to start to wrap up by encouraging you to engage in policy using the words of my favorite fictional president. President Bartlett of the West Wing said decisions are made by those who show up. This TV show inspired a lot of people in my generation to come to DC and work in government. But if you're not familiar with the West Wing or not a big fan of the show, I've got friends that put the same idea another way. So if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So the decisions that are made in DC or in your state capitals or in your town councils are going to affect you. And sometimes it's not always obvious the ways that they might impact what you're doing. So if you're not at the table shaping the outcome, you may have to live with something you don't like. And George Sparks at the opening talked about a lot of ways that, sometimes elected officials set goals and requirements that may not be as practical in implementation as we like to think. So, don't let somebody else write your story for you. You can be the hero creating a different ending, one that's more to your liking. But before you go make your protest sign and march on DC or file your paperwork to run for office, know that there are many roles that you can play in the policy process and many tactics you can deploy. Be sure to consider what works best for you and for the change you want to see. You certainly could be lobbying Congress or federal agencies directly on pieces of legislation or spending like I do, or you could be working hand in hand with an agency to implement a program. I do this a lot too and find some of my most rewarding work, and was really glad to hear Mike Molinar earlier to emphasize the importance of implementation as a critical, maybe the most critical part of the policy process. You could be working to educate decision makers on advancements in engineering that are relevant to policy. For example, the Nature Conservancy is in a partnership with AECOM, Caterpillar, and other engineering firms and engineering departments at universities to educate people here in and around DC on the opportunities to engineer with nature to build projects that protect us from flood risk reduction or coastal storm flooding as well. I was really glad to hear the discussion about the AAAS Fellows Program earlier. I'm a huge fan of that and encourage you all to look at that. You may be thinking about an organized grassroots mobilization of engineers. You know, these opportunities aren't endless, but there really is a long menu to suit just about everyone's comfort level and the resources available. So just a couple of the cautions. You know, I think most people are familiar with this quote from Otto von Bismarck about not wanting to see how the sausage is made, but it still feels like people don't really internalize what this means in practice. So if you're going to get into this policy business, just be prepared to get frustrated from time to time. It is a messy business, and importantly, the closer you look at it, the more you look at it, the messier you will find that it gets. So depending on your level of engagement, you might need to develop a real strong stomach. So beware the sausage making. Also get ready for the long haul. This is a place where I think the Nature Conservancy excels. Any significant policy that you want to see at the federal level is going to take several years to enact, even under the best of circumstances. It is a slow process here in DC at the federal level, and it's designed to be that way. So you'll need to be ready to stay engaged over a long period of time, especially if you have to weather unfriendly circumstances or unforeseen events. And then lastly, try to embrace uncertainty. This is something I still struggle with. I haven't completely shed all of my physical sciences training. You know, earlier I took credit for the Nature Conservancy for influencing Inflation Reduction Act and Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. In truth, it's impossible to know just how much of that $740 billion we impacted due to our specific efforts. So we have to take it a little bit on faith that our work was worth it. I happen to think it was. But it's going to be problematic when you have to prioritize amongst different policy engagements. You might have to rely on some of your best instincts to know where best to deploy your resources. I mean, I think there are a lot of people, including at the Nature Conservancy, who are thinking about the science of policy and how to measure the impact of policy advocacy, which I hope will try to constrain some of that uncertainty. So that's probably more than enough for me. I'll end it here again with my contact information if you want to reach out, and I'll look forward to your questions if there's time. So thanks for your attention and inviting me here.
All right, Jimmy, thanks for that. I was particularly, struck by your comment that I think speaks to vision and personal purpose, that policy, is seen as the greatest pathway to transformational change. And just to sort of, highlight that leverage potential that comes in working there, as opposed to, trying to be Steve Jobs and invent a new iPod to sort of change the world from there. The leverage place in terms of policy is quite significant. I appreciate as well that you were sort of speaking from that federal perspective, like Mike and the fellows were doing earlier, but that you recognize that you can intervene at a variety of different levels, from that federal to state and all the way down to at the local level, and make a huge difference. And so that actually is where we're going to go now with Patricia Gomez, who's the third of our thought leaders, talking about her experience on this journey, having crossed the threshold in terms of public policy service. Patricia is the Director of Energy and Deputy Chief Resilience Officer at Miami-Dade County's Office of Resilience. She comes to that work with a PhD in industrial engineering, very much involved with the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure, ISI, and is a board member of the Envision Review board. So has been, I think, very involved in that side of the infrastructure world from a sustainability standpoint. So in any event, Patricia, really pleased that you can offer this third story in terms of your perspective about public policy and answering that call to service. And if I can turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Kyle. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm gonna share my screen and hope that everything works fine. So it's a pleasure to be here and move down south. So in this panel, we started in Pittsburgh, stopped in Washington, and now we are moving south to Miami-Dade County. And I want to talk a little bit about me and the work that I do. So I have a PhD, which I completed after 20 years of experience. So not the typical person that that's the PhD at a very young age. And I really did it because this was something that I wanted to do for my own gratification. After many years of experience, I felt that I needed to get updated and learn new stuff. And it has been a wonderful experience that I recommend. As Kyle mentioned, I work for Miami-Dade County. I have been working for Miami-Dade County for over 20 years. So a long career in the public sector. I started as an engineer in one of our permitting programs, and little by little, I started moving into more of the policy making, and which also includes a lot of education, like others have said. And in addition to that, I teach at a local university, and really trying to give back to my community in a more direct way, still with sustainability and resiliency, which is my area of focus, and really trying to help those adults that are trying to make a transition, right? And to help them look at what sustainability and resiliency can offer. I am an engineer. I did my bachelor's in chemical engineering, and then I moved here to the United States. And in Florida, we don't have much manufacturing or processing, so I kind of switched a little bit and went into the environmental engineering, which opened a lot of the doors for me that I have been currently working on. And then like I said, I pursued and graduated from my PhD in industrial engineering. So really numbers person, like others have said, and like the challenges that come with engineering. So a little bit about my workplace. Miami-Dade County, it's in the southeast corner of the Florida Peninsula, beautiful place to be. But we are a low-lying coastal community. Miami-Dade County has around 2.9 million people living here. We are one of the most populous areas in South Florida. And we have 34 municipalities, and an area of Miami-Dade County is what we call unincorporated Miami-Dade County, which Miami-Dade County managed directly, and it's considered like another municipality. So it's kind of a not a city. We are kind of like more of a typical regional type of work entity. And we are, of course, based here in Florida. So we need to really pay attention to not only the state regulations, but the federal regulations. So here in Miami-Dade County, our office has a wide variety of focus areas. I have spent most of my time that I have been with the Office of Resilience on the energy and climate mitigation, tackling the source of climate change, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, doing energy efficiency, energy conservation, renewable energy, and similar. And but we also know, as a low-lying coastal area, adaptation is very important. In Miami-Dade County, we have what scientists call sunny day flooding. That happens very frequently. Some of our areas, our neighborhoods get flooded every couple of months. And it's gonna get worse as sea level rise and other climate change impacts get to us. Biscayne Bay is one of our major environmental and I guess pieces here in Miami-Dade County. We are a community that a lot of people come to visit, tourism, and really Biscayne Bay is really important to us. due to many impacts of humans in the Biscayne Bay. For example, the relatively high amount of nutrients that come from the land to the ocean, and warming waters and other different physical changes and other changes to our Biscayne. We have having impacts on the plants that we have, the seagrasses, but also we have had a few major fish kills in the last couple of years. So our mayor created the first chief Bay officer and really trying to help us protect and restore our Biscayne Bay. Extreme heat, also very, very pertinent to our community. As you know, extreme heat is called the silent killer, and particularly in our community, outdoor workers, farmers, and many people are indeed exposed to heat. Last week, if you were watching the news, we had a couple of advisories because heat was coming up really bad. And so we are trying to come up with ideas on how to make our community cooler. Tree planting is a huge activity for us, and a good program that we are trying to increase our tree canopy, but also other things, education, really telling our community what to do when they are exposed to extreme heat. And future ready, again, trying to make sure all our resiliency and sustainability solutions. We do a lot of planning, and we need to make sure that our resiliency and implementation projects go across the board and get included in all this planning, such as the Comprehensive Development Master Plan and others. So what we call is a future-ready plan for Miami-Dade County that really help us implement our projects and really move forward with the implementation of our frameworks. And recently earlier this year, we started focusing on zero waste. It's a problem that many communities face. We have a shortage of landfills, and just like things happen, our waste to energy caught on fire a couple of months ago. And so now that we lost that resource, we are kind of, again, like everybody was saying, thinking a little bit more creative and looking at this complex issue and trying to come up with new ideas. And zero waste is one of those tools that we have in the toolbox and that we can explore to help our community with this huge challenge. So in order to tackle all these challenges and issues, Miami-Dade County has worked, like I mentioned, with our municipalities, such as the Resilient 305 program with City of Miami and City of Miami Beach. Under the 100 Rockefeller cities, we created this plan, and has a lot of great ideas, even has an action for pandemics, and this was before COVID. So really very important that we were able to cooperate with other cities, and now we are working with all 34 municipalities in Miami-Dade County to implement the Resilient 305. The sea level rise strategy, as I mentioned, to help us adapt to rising seas and the flooding. The climate action strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to tackle the source of our problems. And again, Biscayne Bay, how we can help our environmental resource, and the string heat plan that was really unveiled last year and kind of give us that framework to start working on extreme heat, which is such an important piece here in Miami-Dade County. As you know, I'm sure many of you that are in this webinar or summit are interested in climate change and environmental issues. So a lot of the policy making we have been trying to do here at the local level is to tackle these issues. And as you can see, we have both challenges and opportunities in our community. We have a lot of our emissions come from vehicles, transportation, and definitely that's a challenge. People like they come from moving on their own vehicle, traveling on their own vehicle, and so we need to tackle that. But we also have a very, very busy international airport that attracts people from all over the world, as well as a very busy Port Miami that are very important economic engines in our community. So when we talk about policy, we need to be careful that we support our goals, but also we create new opportunities for our economic engines. And of course, the green and blue ways, what we call it here, that help us absorb carbon dioxide and trap some of those harmful emissions, but that we need to maintain an upkeep if we want to be able to benefit from those. The climate action strategy, our goal is to become a net zero community by 2050. So we are really working on the policy side of things to try to determine what we can do and try to help us move to reach our goal. This aligns with our source of emissions, so energy and buildings, working with our existing building stock, expanding renewable energy generation, and really looking into the future of building ultra low energy buildings. So a lot of policy opportunities here in the benchmark return and retrofitting existing buildings. There are very important policy out there that has been tried by New York, Chicago. So we are trying to pursue same opportunities. And as it was mentioned before, it takes time, patience, and persistence. So we have been working on this policy for several years, and we are not there yet, but we hope to be there soon. Land use and transportation, very, very important. Like I said, most of our emissions come from this sector, and so working heavily to reduce our emissions of the transportation sector. And like I mentioned, challenges of opportunities, our waste. One of our actions was to convert waste to energy, but we didn't know the plan will be lost. So now we have an opportunity to think more have more creative ideas to solve this problem, and of course reducing the waste and water use. So moving into a little bit more on why my engineering background has been very helpful and important to move or implement this work and work in the Office of Resilience. I think, like others have mentioned, it allows me to understand complex topics. It allows me to be able to think for innovative solutions, but also do it in a very methodical way. So when we engineers are presented with challenges, we start thinking of those solutions, but we also start trying to compile the data and determine what are the data telling us, so that we can be making data-driven solutions. And that's very important in the policy work, because when you are going to talk to stakeholders, then you clearly can tell them what are the benefits and co-benefits of those policy that you are trying to establish. And when you have the data, that stakeholder engagement, it's a lot easier and allows you also to talk to your peers and your colleagues in a one-to-one discussion. As I was mentioning before, we have been working on this benchmarking and retuning policy. So we call a lot of the building managers and the real estate sector stakeholders in our community to try to develop policy that was tailored to specifically to our community. So it really helps you to have those conversations, start talking about those details of what the policy needs to entail and how to make it successful. Allows me as well to explore new technology. Give me that, allowed me that comfort on looking at new technology, doing a little bit of research. Even though I have a PhD, of course, Miami-Dade County is not a research institution, but whenever we have an opportunity to look at new technology, I can dig into it, look at the details and be comfortable with explaining that to others and participating in a meaningful way. And in addition to that, I think what it has been very helpful, the engineering and important is because I'm able to identify the benefits of the policy that we are proposing. And like I said, and others have said before, that's the part of the storytelling of that policy, why we are engaging in this work, what are the benefits to all our stakeholders. Using the same example, what are the savings to the building managers, to the people that are renting in those buildings, and really having that data to back up all those analysis. I'm happy to say that I'm really enjoying my career. It makes me happy. It makes me want to work harder every day. I see it as having a purpose in my life and really helping or benefiting my community. For example, this is one of our newest libraries, and they are sustainable and resiliency. They were built to lead standards. So again, how we can translate our daily job into the benefits of the community. And you can see it tangible here in a picture of how our policy work has resulted in improved and additional benefits to our community. It allows me to influence a little bit the future, right? County facilities particularly stay here for a long time. So even though our projects take a little long, our facilities stay here in our community for 40, 50 years. So having that engineering background allows me to think beyond the day that we are thinking about building the building or the day that we finish building that building, and allows me to think what is the best way to do it. So we are not compromising the ability of our future generations to enjoy our beautiful Miami-Dade County. It is promising and rewarding. Again, really a lot of hard work and and when you are in the policy making, there is a lot of roadblocks that you face and a lot of frustration, and trying to get consensus about all the stakeholders, including attorneys and other scientists and politicians, is really hard, it's really challenging. But at the end of the day, when you meet that goal and you were able to implement that policy and you see the fruits of that policy, it makes it for a very rewarding career. And it allows me here in Miami-Dade County to work on a multitude of projects. We talk about the built environment, we talk about the Back Bay, storm surge, we talk about Biscayne Bay. So it really allows me to work in a multitude of projects, and so there is never time to get bored. My journey also taught me that even though engineers have a lot of strong abilities, skills, qualifications, we also need to work a little bit more in our communication skills. And I think everybody has said this, so there is nothing new. And I understand Kyle and Mike have talked about this in prior summits as well. But to me, it was very essential. When you do policy, you need to get stakeholders buy-in. So it's not only talking about, for example, going back to our benchmarking and retuning ordinance, not only about the building managers, the building owners, but the community in general. And everybody has a different understanding of our environment and what are the needs and where are we going. So really being able to break down those complex issues, translated it to that everybody in our community can understand. It took a while to get there. Also, in my perspective, I think, or I know I am a little bit shy, so trying to get out there, talk to people, it takes a lot of hard work to be able to do that. And I think by training engineers, we are taught to, go back to your desk, you do your modeling, try to solve the issue, and really we need to be pushed a little bit more to being able to talk to people and be a little bit more open and really receive the feedback from that community. Communications takes different strategies at different levels, being able to talk one-to-one to the stakeholders, shaping the policy, but also talking in a community setting, right? Educating our youth, educating our elderly, educating our workforce. So it's very important to be able to communicate at the level and with the language that everybody understands, and you can gather this support that you need when you are trying to establish a new policy. Also understanding how to work in an interdisciplinary team. It's very important, working with other disciplines. So really being able to share the knowledge and kind of provide that data-driven, that data justification to others. But at the same time, understanding that others in the group may have another focus. For example, our attorneys are looking at things in a different way with a different lens. So trying to understand their point and bringing it to implementation with the policy is very important. It takes a lot of iterations. It's a lot of trial and error in my experience, trying to shape these ordinances or the policy that you are working on to be able to bring it to a point that it can pass and be like something simple like having legal sufficiency. So it's important to be able to work on those interdisciplinary teams. And a little bit of our local flavor. I have been here, as I mentioned, for quite some time. And so in my experience, we had mayors that have been supportive of our work, mayors that are not supportive of our work, mayors that know a lot about it, like our current mayor that has very clear where she's going, but maybe others that didn't know much about sustainability and resiliency. And you combine that with the politics at the state level and the politics at the federal level, and then you come to the conclusion that policy adoption can happen in different environments, but that you need to be able to adapt and being flexible. And set your priorities according to the environment that you are facing, right? So in previous years, we have a mayor that was not supportive of sustainability and resiliency, and we started educating him, but as well, we were trying to talk in language that he understands. So instead of talking about, greenhouse gas emissions, we talk about energy efficiency, energy conservation, dollar savings, stability of our energy pricing. So looking at the same problems with a different lens, but trying to come up with something that everybody can support. As you all know, for policy adoption, you need political support. So educating your elected officials. Here in Miami-Dade County, we have a board of county commissioners and we have 13 members. They all have different priorities. They all have a different, a different way of seeing things, but we need to find something that they can support, that common idea, that common policy that they all can support. And we need to translate in how it's important for their community, right? They're a small little community, and how it's impacting their community on a day-to-day basis. Like I mentioned, for us, flooding is one of our biggest issues, as well as affordable housing. So how we can tackle the flooding, sea level rise in an environment where housing is a huge issue and affordable housing is lacking, and where we can find a place for us to be able to thrive and being able to protect our community, but also provide options for affordable housing. So again, making connections, finding out what their priorities are, and trying to talk with the language that they know and that aligns with their priorities is very, very important. As you all know, right now in our state, we don't have support for certain areas of our work, mainly greenhouse gas reductions. But we are very lucky that we have a lot of support for resiliency, adaptation, flooding. And so how we can work together and take advantage of the opportunities that the state is providing, and also look at the opportunities that the federal government is providing right now. And that's really important, looking at policy implementation. Right now, as you all know, there is a lot of grant and funding, both from the federal and in our case from the state of Florida, to implement this policy. So in this, at this time, we are really being able to see the fruits of our hard work and really trying to put in place those projects to implement that policy. And that's about all I have. This is my contact information. If you want to sign up for our newsletter, please feel free to do so. Really have enjoyed the conversation and learning about what others have been doing and how others have gotten to this important work has been enlightening. So thank you so much for everybody that has listened so patiently, and hopefully we get to answer a few questions. Back to you,
right.
Kyle. Thank you.
Thanks, Patricia. I think I'm going to go ahead and move to our final exercise here fairly quickly, but I want to thank, each of the three presenters there to, talking about their story and, their personal journey with regard to engagement in public policy, and or in the case of Deanna, preparing, the next generations to do the same. What I want to do in the next exercise is give each of you an opportunity to imagine what that journey might look like for yourself. And here, let me share my screen again. And just quickly recap what the exercise is going to look like. Let's see. And I want to scroll down a little bit. So we're going to take advantage of some work, a recent book by one by the name of Jane McGonigal, who is a game theorist and futurist. She wrote a recent book called Imaginable. And in that, she really is prompting people to imagine what the future might be like in a number of different dimensions. So I want to play with that idea. And this exercise will start with asking each of you to spend a little bit of time in just personal reflection and this sense of imagining what it might be like if you really engaged in the public policy arena. So in step one, I'm going to give you probably 7-8 minutes, or maybe a little bit less than that, 5-6 minutes, to answer a series of prompts that come along with this frame of imagining that it's 10 years from now. You wake up and you're actively engaged in the public policy arena. What I'd like you to do is use the following prompts to craft a story, how you have answered this call to service. Now, as you do this, I should note, don't put your notes into the shared workbook because that will end up being seen by everyone. But rather, if you can take some notes off to the side. But the prompts are, what issue or challenge are you working on? Second, what are you doing to influence public policy with respect to that issue or challenge? How are you using your unique skills or personal strengths to help? What level of government or civil society you're engaged with, federal, state, local, etc. What impact have you had or are you having? Remember, this is 10 years from now. How did you get involved in the first place? What support have you had that you found particularly valuable? And how do you feel about what you've contributed? So this is just a process of imagining. Put yourself in that framework 10 years from now. And you don't have to answer all those prompts, but there are ways of crafting this story, imagining that you've really significantly engaged in the public policy arena as a member of the engineering community. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes here. So, you can, maintain your sort of logged in version of Zoom. So don't go away like you were on break or whatever, but work these prompts. And then after 5-6 minutes, we'll put you into small groups to share your stories. So thanks. Go ahead and into that individual reflection.
Kyle, can you put that page back up with the prompts? Yeah.
Yeah, I see Craig's note there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. I'm not sure how it got highlighted, so.
Someone.
Okay, you have about another minute to work on the individual reflections on those prompts. And again, you don't have to necessarily answer all of them. All right, everybody, if we can, I'm going to stop sharing. And what I want to do is move you into small groups. And I think, Mike, 4 groups. And in your groups, what I'd like you to do is have each person, well, once you identify the sort of roles and introduce yourself once again, have each person take just 2 or 3 minutes to tell the story that you've imagined with regard, 10 years from now, having engaged in public policy. Give the most salient portions of that story to others in your group. Following everyone sharing their story, there's a couple other prompts in the workbook that you can look at. Once again, there should be there's a workbook page for each one of the groups. So as you do that work, you can be recording your thoughts into the workbook at that point. So in the groups, we're going to give Mike, if you could, let's call it 22 minutes in the small groups in terms of timing. It's a couple of minutes to introduce yourself, and then 20 minutes in the conversation. As I say, if each person can take 2 or 3 minutes, and then you'll have a little bit of time at the end to sort of put together, the common thoughts on the prompts there in the exercise book. All right. With that, if we can go into small groups, please.
Arm,
Oh,
little arm motion to get them back on again. So, but I stood up.
Hey, Mike. Everyone. So I think, what I'd like to do is just have a very quick report out from each one of the 4 groups. I'm not going to try and share the screen, but rather we can, you can glance at the screen off to the side of the Zoom window. And as I say, what were some of the key insights? Have you comment on what were some of the key insights based on this little piece of imagining the future for yourself? Taking, either continuing on or embarking on a journey with regard to public service or public policy service with respect to public policy. So if we can start with group 1. Not sure who your presenter was.
That's Edwin.
It's me.
Okay, Edwin.
We had a really great conversation, and one insight was everybody's already engaged doing something, so that's probably why they're here. So we need to get more people here in activities like this. The common item was understanding of how local communities are negatively impacted by environmental changes and just a lot of different things. There was a lot of passion in all of the discussions that we had. So people are really engaged in a lot of the items that were discussed were really long-term issues that are going to have a broad influence on communities. Some talk about using all of our engineering technical skills and exposing this stuff to some of our own staff and students and other members we know. We talked about local, state, and national issues. All of them were pretty much that. And at the end, we talked about what could ECL do to to promote out all the things that are being done. And I know we do that somewhat, but set a place for people to report that out, and also how we can get more of these type of things going on in our own companies, community, and organizations.
Okay, great. Thank you, Edna. All right, group 2.
Believe that was our group, Kyle. So, okay, yep. So we had some common themes. Deanna helped me kind of put them together. Community betterment and equity were framed a lot of what we discussed. Items such as like climate change, transportation, and housing. Okay, those are items that had a lot of overlap. So we discussed how they're maybe not exclusive of one another, how there was multiple challenges that could be tackled at once. And so we talked about that. We talked about outreach with the public, and we talked about that in a way that I liked the way QC said it. He said, engagement, not involvement, rather. And so, we talked about having the co-planning projects and endeavors with public and professionals. And then we were joined late from someone from the Transit Authority, and she was sharing that they've got a professional to professional sort of co-planning effort. And so there's this, I think this theme around co-planning, whether it be within the professional development and within the same that share the same disciplines, or how do we engage the public participation and utilizing technology for that. So that the co-planning was a theme that we talked about quite a bit, and overall, again, equity and community betterment.
All right, thanks, Joe.
Yep.
Okay, with that, let's go to group 3.
Sure. Thanks so much. We kind of all had different areas of what we wanted to be involved in on the public policy side, and also what level of government we wanted to participate in. We kind of covered the gamut: federal, state, and then local or municipality. But kind of what we did agree on was we thought engineers needed to be part of the discussion. We thought that there needs to be more opportunities to get involved and participate in areas of passion for engineers. We also believed it needs to be easier to participate in a public policy, and that engineers shouldn't necessarily need to go find it, but it should also be provided or made available to them so that they are aware of the type of issues that are out there. And then also we thought that one of the ways to get more engineers involved were by older engineers kind of bringing in and creating a culture to help bring in younger engineers into the area and participate. And whether it be on a blue ribbon discussion, whether it be serving as a consultant expert within the state or local public policy areas, or whether it be working on, again, academia or a association's policy committee to help move the needle forward.
All right, thanks, Brandon. Okay, and then finally, group 4.
Yeah, Vincent, Carlene, and Craig and I had a spirited discussion, I think, on this, and a lot of it centered on, I guess, on the negative side, sort of a frustration with mandates that aren't well grounded in science or engineering or technology or even feasibility, but the real sort of upside, the need, the increased focus that's possible if we really ground our thinking, ground our solutions, first off in framing the problem right, as we can do, I think, as engineers, hopefully a little better sometimes than it's done today, as well as really deep dive into the communities, the people that are impacted by our solutions, and really creating through our work, whether it's technology or other kinds of engineered solutions, ways to really elevate, the life, the quality of life for people living in those communities. Vincent brought home as a fellow San Franciscan here, just, the wealth disparity we see around the Bay Area and the need to really think about what are those jobs that could be created that sort of merge the technical skills we need to implement the solutions with, the ability for people to live here again, actually be part of this community and own kind of the, the outcomes overall for success of the community as one example. There's a need, we think, to really, as I said, sort of dive deeper to understand impact, to understand those communities, make sure we don't leave people further behind in the process, but a lot of opportunity if we can sort of be engaged, to educate, and to bring that deeper thought and imagination to our work, because we believe that there are innovations that are possible, creativity and sort of the feasibility of implementing, but we have to get more involved and kind of roll up our sleeves to do that.
All right, thanks, Tim. All right, so 4 different sort of perspectives that come with imagining that future. It sounds like just a couple notes on my part, sort of listening to that debrief. I think one, starting, Tim, with your comment about your group's discussion about the frustrations, is actually, I think that point of frustration with something can often be a primary motivator for someone to engage in a constructive way, as opposed to sitting back and playing the victim of that frustration and, not doing something about it. If there's a point of frustration, use that in a positive way to sort of, see, how can I engage in a way that could make a difference there as a motivator? I think certainly, we hear in the imaginings that are there, that there's lots of different ways that are available to members of the engineering community to engage in public policy. It doesn't have to be just lobbying or, making the congressional visit. There's huge ways from, that are represented by the different people, the thought leaders we had speaking to us today, but also in your own conversations here, and at different levels of government or community, from very local up to the federal side, or even beyond that, truly, if we wanted to take that global perspective. So we have to, and send that message that it's not just one thing with regard to engaging, answering that call to service. And when you are, have responded, that idea of engaging. And I think the last thing I would note is it really, I think, probably can be a huge motivator in terms of personal satisfaction in a career by having responded to that, because you really, Daniel Pink talks about, a noble purpose being a primary motivator for people, something that someone is involved with that creates benefits beyond the pure profit motive or beyond the, the individual interest. And I think, that getting, helping members of the engineering community understand the potential of that type of noble purpose for themselves as a way of actualizing that can be really significant. So let me just wrap up and thank you all for your participation. Thank the presenters. Great stories, framing, that started with George, but then Mike and the federal fellows sort of talking about their experience and, what they've learned, what they've gotten out of it, what they're trying to achieve. And then, with each of the 3 in the second round, Deanna talking about, what the good work that Carnegie Mellon is doing with regard to preparing students to engage this way, with the work that was shared by Jimmy with regard to, the Nature Conservancy. We just think the world of the Nature Conservancy's efforts on behalf of society, but how that can happen with regard to the public policy arena. And finally, Patricia's, stories about what she's doing at local government. So appreciated all of those and your own work in the small groups and the debriefs to that. And with that, I'll thank you and look forward to the next time in terms of the Ideas Institute this fall, if you're able to join us in person, and or the next virtual summit that we'll be doing, or other ways that you can get involved. So Mike, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Yes, and I want to thank you all for sticking with us today. And I just want to close by mentioning the Ideas Institute that Kyle briefly talked about. We will be back at the Colorado Chautauqua in Boulder at the end of September for the Institute. And Kyle and our planning committee is developing a really, I think, innovative program for the Institute. We are going to use scenario planning to look at engineering's role in the future. We are lining up experts in important future trends such as AI and emerging tech, diversity and inclusivity, climate change and resilience, and societal trends. And the participants will take that learning from the thought leaders and craft different scenarios of the future and explore how to use these scenarios to enhance our decision-making skills, to recognize major shifts earlier, and to set the agenda for strategies and actions that can increase our contributions. For this year's Institute, we're also working on a Train the Facilitator follow-up workshop that we will offer virtually, which we hope will help you and enable you to implement the learning experiences from the Institute in your own organizations. And you can register for the Institute at our website. Colorado Chautauqua has proven to be a great venue for this event. There's limited housing available on site. So if you are interested, reach out to me as soon as you can. And we would welcome your participation. So we hope you'll stay engaged in Engineering Change Lab and that you will help us spread the word to other organizations or individuals that might be interested in our work. Thank you all again today. Thank you, Kyle, for your leadership and your thought that went into the planning of today. And I hope all of you will enjoy the rest of your week.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Great being with you.
Yep. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you all.
everybody.
All right.